It's crazy whenever I hear people like you speak about this topic, because especially you've been doing this for a long time. You've been around the block, and you make some wild claims.
No, I don't make claims. I make statements based on facts and research. I'm a scientist.
Yeah, but like you say some things that are mind-blowing, and it seems like you have a lot of access to a lot of crazy dark shit. And whenever you hear people say that in today's day and age, a lot of them are full of shit.
Yeah, well, a lot of it is we've sort of, I think, reached a breakout inflection point. There are a group of people from a few black sites, very highly classified operations with aerospace and JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, who have started coming forward that I've been working with for a couple of years. And they're beginning to put their toe in the water and put some information out. And these are guys who've been on the crash retrieval teams. And they've been working with me clandestinely for about 18 months, I think, something like that, or 20 months. And that team is just starting to come out with a little bit of information, but they have an enormous amount more. And what they're trying to do is get the U.S. government to finally set up the protective mechanism so a whole bunch of these high-value targets, HVT, whistleblowers can come forward. So we've been working to set that up through a series of briefings that I've been doing for about 3 years with Senate Intelligence Committee and Senate Armed Services, and taking some of the witnesses. Now, remember, I have debriefed nearly 1,000 top-secret guys. And in our archive, you can go to dpiarchive.com, there's 760-some named. Now only 115 you can see their testimony, but we have 115 you can go look at right now. The others are blackened out because they don't want to be known, but we're handing them over to a special access project to look into what they know, the documents they have, the materials they've seen, and to try to put together the puzzle. So what I liken this to, I call it the disclosure mosaic. So imagine you have a big picture you're trying to create, and because of the highly compartmented nature of top secret special compartment information projects dealing with this, you get a piece here and a piece here and a piece here. So what I've tried to do over the past 35 years, since 1990 when I started this effort, is to put together the mechanism for people to come forward, give us information and testimony, whistleblower testimony, documents when they can get them out of a secure facility, and then put that whole assessment. So it's called an intelligence assessment. And what I discovered back between 1990 and 95 is that the vast majority of information on this subject is actually very carefully curated disinformation.
Right.
It's, if I can be blunt, it's bullshit.
Yeah.
And that's been done deliberately to gaslight the public and Washington officials and the media. But it's also been done to create the specter of a threat from outer space. So what, Werner von Braun, who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler, told his assistant right before he died, who's on our team, Carol Rosen, he said, look, what we're planning to do is to launch a fake alien threat so the world can be united around some sort of dystopian, militaristic, totalitarian state.
Yeah.
And we're real close to that. I mean, a warm-up for that was 9/11. A bigger warm-up was COVID. The big one is this. And if it's not averted, it'll panic the planet into this stupidity. So, and this sort of false flag operation has been run for thousands of years by powerful people and military people to sort of get their way and rule through fear. And so what you're doing with this is that when you look at the whole body of everything I call the legacy ufology crowd, there's good information out there, and then it's mixed in with 9 parts of nonsense. And so what most people do, and this is why by 94 I was ready to give up on this, I'm going to be honest with you. Most government officials go, I'm out, because this is such a cacophony, such a mixture of fact and fiction and rumors upon rumors upon rumors. They don't have time for it.
Yeah.
I'm an emergency trauma doctor.
Right.
So I'm going, this is crazy stuff. So, but I've stuck with it to try to make my way through this vast amount of noise.
That's what I was trying to express to you kind of right before we started, was that I've had so many folks on here talking about this topic, from authors to firsthand experiencers, people that have tried to be whistleblowers, to filmmakers who have talked to all these witnesses and whistleblowers and all these folks. And it's just like this crazy cauldron of disinformation, misinformation, different partitions of the government fighting against each other. And then you have, just like the strategic deception that goes along. It's been going on since the Cold War. And it's just like, I've literally just been out on the UFO topic for the last probably like almost a year. I've just been sick of it because so much of it is fucking bullshit.
Yep.
And I don't know if you've ever seen that documentary. I'm sure you have, Mirage Men, about Richard Doty and how the Paul Benowitz thing.
Sure.
That has been my basic. I've been looking at this whole topic through that lens since I saw that about a year ago. And it seems like, as you were alluding to, it seems like that is the predominant. It seems like that is about 80% of the information that's coming out is like specifically curated as like counterintelligence, disinformation to poison the well of information on this topic.
But let's unpack that. Why? So if you look in our archive, we have a top secret document that was, I believe, accidentally declassified from Canada in the 1970s. It's called the Wilbur Smith document, and it's a top secret document that is from 1950, describing the U.S.-based reverse engineering research projects on extraterrestrial vehicles that were retrieved in the 40s. And it's an authenticated document. And it says a few things. Number one, it says, quote, flying saucers are real. That's what they used to be called before they made up the fake name UFO, UAP. Those were made up.
I hate how everyone's calling it NHI all of a sudden.
Oh, yeah. We'll get into this. It's the CIA Psychological Warfare Division that has the linguistics department. Yeah. All right. Look, I started briefing the director of the CIA in 1993.
I know you did. You brought the briefing for Trump in today, right here.
Yeah, right here. So
look at this big stack of documents we got here. Can you see that, Steve, on the camera?
Yeah. Oh, well. I mean, it is what it is. So the big problem became once they realized what they had, right? And people were seeing these things. Because once we started detonating atomic bombs and then the thermonuclear weapons, these civilizations from out there came in, like it was like a homing signal. And here's why. When you detonate an atomic weapon or a thermonuclear weapon, which is a hydrogen bomb, a fusion bomb as opposed to fission, what you get is an electromagnetic pulse, but embedded in that is what's called a scalar signal, like Tesla talked about. And that is not a waveform, like a sine wave. It's a point that goes out in a straight line at multiples of the speed of light. It disrupts interstellar communications and transport. So it was a bit like kicking a hornet's nest, right? Because not that they were hostile towards us, but they were concerned, like what is going on in this little corner of the cosmos? So that was the whole modern era of these, although they've been seen for thousands of years. But once we got to the nuclear threshold, we crossed the Rubicon here. All right, a red line went over. And so this is why they're seen all over the place near nuclear installations, nuclear ships that are carrying, or big carriers that have nuclear weapons on them. Yeah, I know many officers who had these craft around them checking that out, even nuclear power plants. So there's a big danger with that nuclear system and how it pertains to not only the future of the Earth, which they have an interest in, these civilizations, the ET ones, but they also are concerned about what happens when a civilization at our level of social and spiritual development, which ain't great, has these kind of technologies and start going out into space. So it coincided shortly within 10, 15 years of detonating the first atomic bomb in 1945. By 1957, the Soviets had put Sputnik up. Right. And so they knew that we were going to be outward looking going into space.
Why do you think these beings are invested in the future of the Earth? If they're not from here and they're from another, like if we found another Earth, if we found another planet inhabitable with life and we were way more advanced than they were,
right?
Why would we want to protect them from themselves?
Well, I think that what I have found is people evolve. I mean, let's just say, whether you want to call it spiritual or socially, psychologically, you develop compassion, you develop empathy, you develop longer range vision than the next quarterly report, right? In other words, you have a view. So you take on a long range view. And I think those civilizations, some of them may have come our way before and faced near extinction level events. Or they've seen other civilizations come and go that have, blown themselves up or become a problem.
Right.
So I think there's a big, let's call it cosmic institutional memory out there. There's nothing new under the suns. This has probably happened before. But I also think they see the goodness in humanity, the capacity for creativity, for exploration, for intelligence, even very high levels of spiritual consciousness. So it's not as if they view us all as so dimly. I think they see the promise, but they see right now this little window of time in the last 100 years or so, where we're, on the one hand, technologically advanced enough to destroy ourselves, and I'll get to this in a moment, potentially threaten other worlds with technologies that we've developed from reverse engineering extraterrestrial transport systems. But we're also not socially and spiritually evolved enough to not blow ourselves to smithereens. So that is exactly the sweet spot, or let's call it the dangerous spot of where a civilization could go sideways very badly.
Right.
All right. And we're there. We've been there since, the mid 20th century.
Do you think there's any chance that these things or what do you make of the theory that these are future humans?
Well, I think there have been some encounters that are our descendants from the future. So I think we have to be careful here. I think of let's say a species evolves for 500,000 years and becomes spacefaring. Evolution doesn't stand still. And so they could evolve to something that would look like a non-human being, an extraterrestrial being, but have been descended, but 20,000 generations ago.
Right.
And certainly that's possible. I think that's probably what happened at Rendlesham Forest, Bentwaters.
You mean 20,000 generations in the future?
Yes, from 500,000 years in the future. Right. And from some of the military guys who were there where this object landed in early 80s in England, there's pretty good indication that there was some contact that happened that was psionic, telepathic, that they were us from 500,000 years in the future. And it was a pyramid-shaped onyx-looking like black onyx-looking object. Very well documented case. But eventually the Ministry of Defense in the United Kingdom, I went over there and met with them back in '93, and shortly after that they did declassify some of their information on it. So my understanding that might have been, but still, in the sense they were extraterrestrial, but they weren't from this, particular time space. So it gets into how you define that. But my understanding is, if one of our whistleblowers who's passed away, Sergeant Stone, he was on a retrieval team, crash retrieval, dealing with this in the 60s. And by the late 60s, he said there were 69 specific non-human extraterrestrial species that they had cataloged.
69? When you think about a successful business, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and sweet marketing. But what you don't think about is the business behind the business that's making the sales. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. It's the #1 checkout on the planet used by 4 million companies. And they're not so secret. Shopify's Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts will go abandoned. With Shopify, in minutes, your store can go from a blank canvas to a professional storefront that's unique to you. And Shopify has powerful social media tools. Connect to all your channels and turn those casual scrollers into paying customers with shoppable posts. Because let's face it, people are already scrolling. Why not make it work for your business? Because businesses that sell more on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/Danny Jones, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/Danny Jones to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/DANNYJONES. And thank you, Shopify, for sponsoring the show.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's way more than that now. So that, and his information, before he passed away, we got his archive that's in our archive. And also we got a very extensive interview with him. And so there are many people like that who come forward and have told similar accounts. Now, one of the problems is if you're in a compartment operation like that, you're not going to be read into or briefed on something of very similar nature that's in a different base or another compartment operation. It's very, very compartmentalized is what they call it. So what I've tried to do is to see where it syncs up. So let's say you have, 10 people who've been on crash retrieval teams that I've debriefed. It's probably more than that. Where were they? What did they see? What was their methodology? And how much of that is congruent? And when you get congruence from people who don't know who each other are, so I'm sort of, my project, the disclosure project's been the clearinghouse for hundreds of these guys. Then you begin to be able to find out where the sweet spot of truth is and try to build out this picture. So that's what we've tried to do. It's been painstaking. And,
When it comes to the 69 different variations of non-human life that this gentleman cataloged, the idea of the future humans thing is interesting to me when it comes to these beings, these short little gray alien beings with 2 legs and 2 arms. Because if you think about how rare we are on Homo sapiens on planet Earth, there's like over 2 million cataloged species of animals on planet Earth. There's out of those 2 million, there's 20 hominids. Out of the 20 hominids, only one of them figured out how to develop technology to get off the planet. So we are super rare on this planet alone. So now you want to extrapolate out into the universe and find all the other Goldilocks planets that are able to inhabit life. They have different oxygen levels, different gravity. Most of them are water worlds, very different atmospheres. What are the chances they're also going to evolve? That something like us is going to evolve, bipedal, upright walking, 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head that says brain that sits directly on top of the head.
It's very high, and here's why.
It's a high probability that would happen?
Yes. And if you look at the work of Rupert Sheldrake at Oxford and morphogenic field propagation, because of quantum entanglement, let me explain to the audience what that means. Quantum entanglement is at that level of quantum physics where every point in space and time is interconnected. Now, the ultimate quantum entangled field is mind or consciousness, which we can get into this. This gets into the deep end of the pond very quickly. But when let's say something works in one area, and it becomes something that is within that morphogenic field at a quantum entangled level, it spontaneously begins to pop up elsewhere. And this is known as field propagation through quantum entanglement. So it would make total sense that that'd be the case. Now, there'd certainly be huge variety amongst that, within that template. And there may be other forms as well. But I think that form, what's called, the form of a universal person, a head, 2 arms, 2 legs, is probably pretty consistent. Now, there may be others, and they may have evolved from, like, we're 98% identical to chimps. So I'll take a look. I mean, some of us more than others. One of my best friends calls me a big A because I'm muscly and furry. But they, so we just go, okay, that's us, right? But there could be a species that evolved from the equivalent of a cetacean or a dolphin or a bird-like or what have you.
Right.
So I think there's a huge amount of variation in the cosmos, but it's not that surprising that there would be this morphogenic field propagation. Some people call it the 100th monkey effect, where they studied monkeys on an isolated island, and once the troop learned how to do a skill, spontaneously hundreds of miles away, the monkeys on another island started doing it.
Yeah, but
it was like this entangled field.
Right, I understand what you're saying. You're talking more about consciousness, but I'm talking like hard
physics.
biology.
I am too, but you're acting like those are separate. They're not. So this
how are they not separate? I'm saying, like, how is it if physically on a planet, if the gravity is different, if the atmosphere is different, if there's no land, if it's all ocean?
But that's external. So I'm talking about the internal. See, here's the thing that's very interesting. we're different in every imaginable way, but we're the same in a very essential way, and that they're sentient and conscious. So let's talk about field consciousness and what Erwin Schrödinger, the father of modern particle wave theory and quantum physics, in 1908 said, the total number of minds in the universe is one. Mm-hmm. That is, it is a singularity. So I know it sounds very Spockian, but this is a fact, actually. It's been proven.
Very Jungian.
Yeah. It's been proven by Dr. John at Princeton University, who had the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. And I knew him before he passed away. And they did very accurate studies with random number generators where you would just think to it, and it would change it from just equal distribution of zeros and ones to shifting to, say, ones. Digital. They were just quantum digital random number generators. Mm-hmm. Very well done studies, have been replicated all over the world. So what is that? So we always think of ourselves as sort of these islands that are completely separate because of 3D, right? Our bodies, the environment.
Right.
But what if there's a level of not only in physics, physically, what they call quantum entanglement, and Einstein called it the spooky effect, but also on a level of consciousness and mind. It explains a lot of phenomena, a great deal of the phenomena. So the one good thing, before I went to medical school, and you're going to laugh, it's such an anachronism now, I became a meditation teacher and studied Sanskrit and the Vedas, mm-hmm. and sort of learned really in depth about the science of consciousness and all of that.
You're a hippie.
When I was 19, 20, it was great fun. Yeah, I was just sort of, I finished college when I first went in, and I said, what am I going to do now? So I said, well, let's do this. And that was a consequence of a contact experience I had. And then that was a consequence of having had a near-death experience when I was 17. So it sort of opened up that trajectory into consciousness and the study of that. Mm. And then where does that intercept with all this? Well, it's actually turns out to be essential. So, you have this team of people who've just defected from, I can't say which black sites. I've been at those black sites. And they were using a type of psionic or psychic interface with technology to intercept and bring craft in and then hit them with electromagnetic pulse weapons.
Right.
I've been at these sites. I know where they are. And I've met some of the operators. And it's real. I mean, it sounds like science fiction, but it didn't.
No, it sounds like Stranger Things in real life.
Well, everything. The science fiction is all ripped out of the things that are real often. But this is the real end of it, and it's serious. But that's why the CIA had a remote viewing program 30 years on. I know a lot of those original remote viewing guys. And so that whole area, where does that have to do with UFOs, though? Well, it has to do with the fact. Now, I wrote about this in a 1991 paper called The Comprehensive Assessment of the UFO ETI subject, extraterrestrial intelligence subject. And it describes two related phenomena. That those civilizations have technology that assists their consciousness in these capabilities. But they also have the ability to have their consciousness augment the technology so they can think to that camera. It's like Neuralink without the wires, at the speed of thought rather than the speed of electromagnetic field propagation.
Yeah.
So, and that's real. And so civilizations that if they're, from the Andromeda galaxy, right? And 2.5 million light years from here. Mm-hmm. They're not using your cell phone at the speed of light. It would take 2.5 million years to say, hey, how you doing?
Right.
And another 2.5 million years for you to return the reply.
Right.
So the speed of light ain't going to cut it. Mm-hmm. So when you go what I call superluminal, beyond the speed of light, you're going into transdimensional. You're crossing dimensions. And within those finer dimensions, it becomes more and more preeminent that you're using conscious fields and thought. And it's really strange stuff, but it's true. And so if you don't understand that, you're never going to understand extraterrestrial civilizations.
How much faster is this conscious superluminal?
Instant. So
it's instant.
It's instant. Now, not necessarily to transport systems, but if you're communicating, it's in real time. Because there too, let's say you're here and your home base is 2.5 million light years away. It's because it's not going in a straight line. Forget about the speed of light. think again about this interrelated quantum entangled cosmos
Right.
at the level of not only thought and consciousness, but even very refined electromagnetic systems. So then you go, boom, it's in real time. And this is where they've done studies recently where they have teleported particles, and they have what the spooky effect, where the same particle can be in two places at once that Einstein described. So I don't know if I'm boring your audience at this point. But
no, you're not boring them.
But so at that point, you begin to realize that if you're a very advanced civilization and you want to become interstellar, you're not going to be using the junk that all of us think is so all get out from Silicon Valley. I mean, that's rubbish, right?
How did you figure this out? This stuff, the superluminal consciousness communication.
Well, the truth.
I prefer the truth.
Yeah. Well, it was a bit of a long story. But anyway, in 1973 in March, I got very sick and I died, had a near-death experience.
Okay.
I was raised an atheist, and we didn't believe in anything. If it didn't fit in a test tube, it didn't exist. Nonsense. But I had this amazing, beautiful experience, actually. And I had personally this experience of my own, say, drop of my individuality becoming the ocean, sort of this expanded consciousness state. That was infinite. It was boundless. And it was very beautiful. And obviously, I didn't die because here I am. But it was a very serious near-death experience. And about 6 months later, a couple months later, I decided I'm going to learn meditation because I said I want to get back to that state without getting sick and dying. So I learned how to meditate and started studying that. And then I was up on a mountain in North Carolina, outside the little town of Boone, North Carolina. And I was hiked up there before sunset. And I wanted to see the sunset and meditate, and that was it. And just before sunset, I saw a perfectly seamless disc that appeared. And I'd seen almost an identical one when I was 8 or 9 in North Carolina. I grew up in the Charlotte area. And I went, oh, they're back. I didn't think anything more about it. I just thought, well, there it is. I just accepted this.
Okay.
Because I had looked into this when I was a kid after I had my sighting. But that's all that happened. It was there, and it didn't move off. It just winked out, just sort of like dematerialized or vanished.
Right.
So I go and I meditate. I'm sitting there, and it gets dark. And when I open my eyes, I have this, the whole Milky Way is up above. And up at over 5,000 feet up there, crystal clear, October 1973. And I had this beautiful thought that entered me. I said, behold, what a beautiful universe God has made. And with that, I went into that same experience I had when I died. It was phenomenal, but I was in my body. So I looked over, and there was a glow over the edge of the hill mountainside. I think it was that craft, and there was a person. Now, as an 18-year-old kid, I thought it was a deer standing on its hind legs. It had beautiful eyes, maybe about 4.5, 5 feet tall. It came over and it touched my right shoulder, and I left. I just dematerialized for about 4 hours.
4 hours?
Yeah. Now, I thought it was about 30 to 45 minutes, something like that, because time isn't the same in these dimensions. But so during that encounter, I started having this experience of where non-human and extraterrestrial and humans, where could we connect? And it was at this place of non-locality, it's called in physics, and consciousness. So I started practicing this with these ETs.
This episode is brought to you by TrueWork, a clothing company hell-bent on bringing you the most technical, high-performance workwear on the face of the earth. The TrueWork story begins in the Colorado mountains, where a trade worker knew there had to be a better solution than the wet, heavy gear that was weighing him down, and TrueWork was born. I love TrueWork because their clothing is real, rugged, heavy-duty workwear built for the 20th century, and it's not uncomfortable. It's better because it's soft, comfortable, stretchy, and fits better than traditional workwear. And my favorite part is that when you're trying to be agile, bend down, squat, or contort your body in a weird way, their jeans won't pinch your balls like traditional skinny jeans that most nerds wear nowadays. Every TrueWork product is engineered for maximum efficiency, comfort, and protection. And when you put them on, you feel the difference. When I put on traditional cotton or denim pants, I can literally feel the 200-year difference in technology. TrueWork upgrades traditional classics with fabrics used by elite outdoor athletes. Soft, stretchy, sweat-wicking soft shell work pants are a huge upgrade over stiff, heavy jeans. Wind and waterproof shells use intelligently placed insulation for streamlined warmth and lets you stay mobile and agile. TrueWork has over 50,000 5-star reviews and countless stories from trade pros in every state and every job across the country. Upgrade to TrueWork for a major change in the way you work. TrueWork helps you be your best when your best matters most. Check out TrueWork's full lineup and get 15% off your first order at truework.com/Danny. That's 15% off at truewerk.com/Danny. It's linked below. Now back to the show.
And
This meditation.
yeah, so we have an app called CE5 Contact. It's probably the most controversial things I'm doing.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Yeah, and it works. And if you look at the movie Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, you're going to go, whoa, wow. I just sent your producer a picture of a ET that appeared in.
Oh yeah, you sent the alien. Can we see the alien that he said?
Well, no, the aliens are from Guatemala.
Okay.
These are extraterrestrial biological entities. But
What's the difference?
I'm just making a joke.
Oh,
I know.
okay.
I know. We're in Florida. Nobody takes
No, we make jokes in Florida. They're way dirtier. They're way dirtier than that.
It's impossible.
So this is where'd you see this one?
So this is in Arizona a couple years ago, and we were doing the CE5 contact protocols, and you can
Full screener, Steve?
Yeah, you have to do full screen, otherwise it's useless.
Yeah. He's learning how to use them.
There you go. So it looks like a beak, and it's this round head, and you see the eye socket on the left. There's a light source that was not ours coming from his left, and sort of a feathery tunic. Now, this was about 3 feet from me. And we had David Marconi, who wrote Enemy of the State with Will Smith, had a great Nikon camera set up on a tripod with a remote. And we had seen what looked like a red orb right between this older gentleman and a member of our team, and then it was me. And I said, take a picture here, and he did. And here's this person that we had heard walking around behind us without seeing it with the naked eye. But it captured this person.
It's weird.
It's very
what
unusual.
The hell? Like I can't. It's hard to make anything of it.
No. I mean, the right eye socket. You can see it's a very big head with like a beak-like nose.
I can
and
see
mouth, and then a tunic, and there's a right hand there. I mean, this is at night with no illumination. By the way, we're out there in the middle of the wilderness in pitch black. So this, by the way, we call this ET the healer because he has appeared at other times, and the man right beside him had lost his hearing since he was in middle or high school. And even with hearing aids, he could barely hear. And this...
Wait, what is that next? Is that that's just like a light orb or something right there, Steve?
That's just some...
to the left?
This thing?
Yeah.
Looks like I don't know.
No, that's the
rock.
man. That's that older gentleman who lost his
That's
hearing.
a person?
Yeah. You know, eyes checked. That's a person.
So it looks like a face floating in the middle of the...
No. He's sitting in we're in chairs in a circle.
Okay.
Yeah. We could give you the whole context of it. But what's interesting is that he was healed of his hearing loss. But the next morning he woke up totally fixed. So it's, I've been doing this since I was 18. So now I'm 69, so for 51 years. And what I find interesting about retail ufology, it's always, I was abducted and I was tortured and I was this. I'm going, yeah, that's the CIA. You mentioned the Greys. I know who manufactures those.
You know who manufactures the gray
human
aliens?
Yes, they're not aliens.
Well, the gray beings that Willie Strieber talks about.
Yeah, the fake ones, as they're called. So
how do they get them to abduct people? Like, there's all these stories that John Mack has talked about. He's interviewed some people.
I knew John very well.
Yeah, and then he talked to, I think, hundreds of people that explained being abducted by the little grays and taken up into ships and had sperm and eggs extracted from them.
Yeah, as if...
How do you explain that?
Talk about delusions of grandeur, like they need our sperm and eggs.
Have you heard the theory that the future human theory, like if there was a cataclysmic event in the future, like way in the future, and they had to come back in time to get our DNA to repropagate humanity in the future, that's a hypothesis I've seen.
I call it the cosmic Noah's Ark.
Yeah, right, yes.
Yeah. No, but I mean, there's a mixture of things. So here, remember this.
Okay.
October 1954, we mastered gravity control.
Who mastered it?
The covert programs in the United States aerospace.
But there was a couple people working on it. There was Lewis Whitten and
No, I'm talking about if you take T. Townsend Brown's work.
Okay,
and
T. Townsend Brown. Okay.
And the Beefhill-Brown effect, all that started in the 20s. And if you look at a film that we released a couple years ago called The Lost Century, it kind of unpacks all this. It's a documentary.
Okay.
And people should look at that. You know, it explains all this and this trajectory of how this evolved. Mm-hmm. And so there were experiments with very high voltage systems that called an electrogravitic effect, where things would lift, right?
Okay.
And that was in the 20s. That was 28, 29. It was replicated in Germany in the Kautsky-Frost experiment. We have a physics journal. We show that in the film.
Okay.
It's in here for the briefing.
Okay.
Now, imagine those early experiments with so-called anti-gravity.
Okay.
Not a good term, but was used a pop culture term. It's actually electrogravitics and electrogravitic field propulsion, but it's not a physics class.
Okay.
So what happened is that that research combined with a augmentation of that research, a big leap forward by studying the extraterrestrial vehicles that we downed
Right.
in the mid-40s and 50s.
Right.
So by the time those two streams combined into a mighty river of research, but it was covert. As I was referring to, that Wilbur Smith document is the most secret. And he said this is the most secret operation in the United States, exceeding the secrecy of the hydrogen bomb research. Now, this is 1950, before we detonated the first hydrogen bomb. So imagine something more classified and secret than the H-bomb, the ultimate doomsday weapon. Mm-hmm. That's this stuff. So, my uncle had his whole career at Northrop Grumman. He worked on the lunar module that landed on the moon. But those big aerospace companies, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Skunk Works, and now Raytheon, EG&G, way back then, and others, they got the portfolio for their special projects to study this material, figure out how it worked, and then apply it.
Yeah.
So by 1954, we had operational gravity control so that we were building our own UFOs. And I always tell people, if you see something you call a UFO or a UAP, you have to ask yourself, it could be one of three things. It could be an extraterrestrial vehicle or NHI craft. It's the pop culture now. It can be a man-made one coming out of one of these big aerospace companies because they've been zipping around since the late 50s.
Right.
Or it could be neither of them, and it could be some extra-dimensional entity, something from another dimension that's not extraterrestrial.
So my way
this is where it gets confusing for people, and it's deliberately been commingled. In other words, disinformation specialists from the CIA and other places, like Lou Elizondo,
he called you a terrorist.
Yeah, I know. It's very funny. I'm a terrorist for speaking the truth. Well, that's I mean, as opposed to people who are actually trying to create Armageddon, which would be his crowd.
Yeah.
But the problem is that if you don't have enough of the information, and this information's been in a blackout for 70 years, if you're David Fravor flying a F-18 chasing one of these things, and you're not read in, you're a jet pilot. You're not read into what's coming out of the underground facilities at Skunk Works out there in the desert.
Yeah.
So you're going to immediately think, oh, shit, I just saw an alien craft. No, you saw something that was made at the Skunk Works that was moving in a way with no visible means of propulsion.
I was just trying to clarify earlier on the anti-gravity side of things. Jeremy Riss, alien scientist, who's a physics historian, was explaining to me that there was two main groups. One was Lewis Whitten and the people that he was working on it with, and then Bryce DeWitt, who was working on anti-gravity in like the earlier 50s, like before 54. And he thinks that one of them figured it out, and then I guess from my understanding is that went black all of a sudden.
Yep.
Like they got co-opted by somebody. And then like in 50, I think it was 57, there was like a, what was it? There was some big like anti-gravity conference or something.
Right.
Where they were trying to figure, but why would they have that conference in 57 if they had figured it out in 54? You know what I mean?
Well, because it's compartmented. I mean, the left hand doesn't know the right hand exists. I mean, I've done briefings for the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, 3-star general, and he didn't know anything that was going on with this, even though he made inquiries. He was blown off. So everyone thinks that there's sort of this, you're the president, or you're a 3 or 4-star general, and you have an all-access pass. You do not. And that is what my big coming of age on this, and why I started the Disclosure Project.
Right.
In 1993 was when I briefed the director of the CIA for Bill Clinton. I learned, and it was a 2 or 3 hour
Woolsey?
meeting. Yeah, R. James Woolsey, who's since flipped on everybody.
How did he find you, by the way?
A friend of his, he had been on the board of a think tank, Pentagon think tank, knew him and was following what we were doing. Okay. And it was mainly because in 1992, here in Pensacola, Florida, near there, we had a CE-5 contact team, and we vectored in 4 ET craft, and one of them was on the front page of the Pensacola paper, got picked up by the intelligence community. And before you know it, I had all kinds of spooks knocking on my door. So, everyone who laughs at that, I say, yeah, what you're missing is the main part of the secret, dude. You're missing the big picture totally. You're flat earthers if you think the universe is 3D flat. You're a flat earth society. But anyway, so that got on the radar of this think tank that was looking into the subject under a contract with the Pentagon. And then, and the director of that think tank and the CIA director were friends. So once he became director of CIA, he and Clinton and some other people, Webster Hubbell at Justice, were trying to find out about UFOs, and they were being gaslit and lied to or deceived, and they knew it. I mean, Clinton was smart enough to know he was being zoomed. And so they reached out to me to come up and provide the information I had. Now, initially, I will say, if you look in my archive, you'll see the letter, the correspondence about this. I thought they were just trying to pick my brain, and there was intel gathering exercise. No. I mean, the director of CIA and the president had been completely denied access, threatened, and told nothing. And I, at that time, look, I'm a 30-something year, mid-30s medical doctor working full-time as ER, like the show or something. Never seen the show. But the truth is that I thought surely they have more information than I do. This is nuts. So, and they were just lying about what the purpose of the meeting was. And they were just trying to gather information from me. But it wasn't. He was shaken, and they really did. And that's when I realized that the organization that's running these covert programs is unconstitutional, criminal, and has been since the late 1950s, since Eisenhower kind of lost control of them. He was betrayed. So there has been no proper legal constitutional oversight of any of these operations, and this is dangerous, since at least 1956-7, somewhere in that period.
Yeah.
So,
and that's where Grush came into the picture, and he was tasked to track down some of this lost black budget money, right? And that's when all these whistleblowers started to come out recently.
Well, not really. I mean, that's a late recent event.
Yeah.
Okay, so there were more significant events that happened in the 90s. That people don't know about or don't talk about, because Clinton had set up a military team, because they used to call it Team Blue was the regular military, Team Black were these illegal projects, and he set up what's called Team Red to penetrate those covert illegal programs. Most of those, and I know some of these guys, most of those guys were killed or absorbed into Team Black. So some of the whistleblowers just now coming forward, some of the older ones, had been on Team Red. I can't say which ones, but they'll disclose that when they're ready. And they got totally pulled into these illegally run operations. Now remember, if you're a 18, 20, 25-year-old Delta Force guy or Green Beret, you're not read into the chain of command up above you. You just go, yes, sir, and you're going to do what you're going to do.
Right.
But once they reached a certain level of seniority, they realized they were in an illegal criminal operation, which is when they reached out to me. And they said, one of them said, thank you for what you're doing for those of us stuck on the other side, meaning stuck in this illegal criminal operation, and they want out. So the good thing is there's a momentum happening now. If we can get whistleblower protections through the Congress and an executive order from the president, where there's a whole dam ready to break of folks like that,
Right.
that we have, who will come forward and with the evidence, and this will begin to be solved. It's just the beginning. So that's what we're trying to work on. But it way predates Grush. I met with Mr. Grush when he was still undercover and gave him information, and his bosses were people that were people I had briefed in the SCIF, the Secure Compartment Information Facility. So he came out with what he had done, but he was secondhand. He had not been operational.
Right.
I'm talking about the firsthand operational people. And what's interesting, if you look at the House Oversight Committee hearings, it's all been all these secondhand people. And I told Congressman Burchett and Luna, and said, why don't you subpoena the people that we have? Here's a list of the top 25.
Right.
And these are people, like I just described, who are operational at the Skunk Works. Interestingly, they never call those people to a hearing. I said, don't call me. I'm just the doorway. I'm the opener, right? No. Call these guys. And here's their name. And by the way, here's their DD-214, and here's where they're operational. Guess what? You have to wonder why. I mean, are really people that clueless in Washington, or is something going on there? I don't know.
Yeah. So your disclosure project has, I believe, over 400 military witnesses.
760 some now.
760.
Yeah.
And what would you say is the most credible out of all of those witnesses?
Well, it's the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Now, remember, I think these guys just starting to come out who've dealt with the targeting and downing of these craft, and how they've done it, and the collateral damage, the civilians in private airplanes that have been killed in the process. That is one of the biggest stories in American history that's about to come out. So
private planes that have come down.
So let me explain how this works. So let's say you're out at some black site out in the desert out west.
Okay.
I won't say which one I was. And I've been in this Special Forces guy's chopper that's on the retrieval teams and flown over this area, and seen the equipment and the underground base opening, all that. And I have pictures and videos of it. It's in here.
It's in your presidential briefing right here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that actually, this is available for people to order now. We've sanitized some of the sensitive names out, and you can go and order it in a hard.
This thing right here.
This whole thing.
How do you order it?
Well, I don't know. I don't do that. My assistant will give you guys a link, but everyone listening can get one.
And how would they go about doing that? They would get the link from your assistant?
Mm-hmm. No, you can put it up.
I can put a link to it?
And our drstevengreer.com, there'll be a link to it. Right, Raven? Anyway.
And then
I don't do that stuff. But
and then what is your plan with this? You're briefing?
This has already been provided to the incoming new president and to some of his senior folks. And we're continuing, and also to the key oversight committee, Senate Intelligence, Armed Services.
And what was their reaction to it?
But they're just now studying it. It's an enormous amount of information and intelligence. So there are some entities that are on the enforcement end of U.S. government that are now drilling down heavy on the, let's say, methods and sources that are in here. The people, the witnesses, the whistleblowers, and the facilities and corporations. Probably one of the most significant people to come forward, if we can protect him, is the former chairman of a Fortune 50 company that's been involved with this. It's a household name. I won't say which one. And he wants to come forward. He's like 80 years old this year, and he deeply regrets what they've done. And, he's admitted that they have the schematics and the designs to provide free energy, quote unquote, to the whole world. And he really regrets all this secrecy. But at the same time, he, as soon as he reached out to me through his assistant and friend.
Fortune 50. It's one of the top 50 companies.
Yeah, it's huge. And
can we play? Can I guess?
No, I'm not going to play that game. No, I don't. But I would betray that man's trust because it'd be easy for someone to figure out who it is.
It wasn't a military contractor, though.
It's a big company that has a lot of fingers and a lot of pies, right? Okay. But this man then was threatened, and they threatened to kill his whole family and his grandchildren. So what I'm trying to get, and it was, the Senate Intelligence Committee passed in 2023 unanimously the provision to give amnesty or safe harbor to these kind of people, right?
Yep.
But the House, in the reconciliation of the bill, took it out due to a couple of guys who were, I think, bad actors there.
Yeah, who were those guys again? Were those the Ohio guys? The Ohio Senator?
Mike
Turner.
Mike Turner was chair of Senate Intelligence, and the other Mike Rogers, who was chair of Armed Services, and a few other people gutted that. And it kind of...
And why? Why do you think those two guys?
Because I think they receive a lot of funding from the very people that need to be exposed. I mean, I think it's not obviously they're carrying water for someone, which is corruption. But that's Washington, right? I mean, who's got the money? Who's got the blackmail file on you? Right.
Yep.
People get bribed. People get threatened. People get killed. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a fact. I've had all those games run on me. So, but I think that there's, someone like that would have, a lot of the keys to the kingdom. But if you're at risk for RICO charges, right, federal racketeering influence corrupt organization charges due to the criminal activity that you oversaw as an executive, and maybe worse things, but you're also under threat from the organization keeping the secret of having you or your family killed. Like this gentleman, I don't think he would mind if he got killed, but he doesn't want his children and grandchildren killed.
And what is his? And so, what did he see? What is his? What is his connection to this stuff?
No, he was a chairman of a massive corporation, but he was read into a very special projects compartmented area dealing with the technology.
And that's the reason he doesn't want to come forward publicly, because he's been threatened. His family's been threatened.
Of course. Yeah. And so now I know who he is, and the people who are going to need to know, the president, attorney general, law enforcement, and on down the system will know, or do know by now. So the only question becomes, what are they going to do about it? Now, when I was beginning to tell you about these black sites, all right, now imagine, okay, you're out in a desert site, remote, no access, ground sensors, you're not going to get in there easily. And underneath the ground out there, there is a huge complex of STIFs, or subterranean facilities, and some people call them DUMBs, deep underground military bases. And in our briefing document you can get, it actually has 150 or so of these sites where UFO-related operations have been. Some are key ones. Some have been incidental or peripheral ones.
Right.
And that's available for anyone to look at. Anyone who wants to look at it can see it.
Okay.
And so I'm in this chopper hovering over one of these, and there's the opening from underground where the man-made UFOs go up, go over a test range, and they're hit with electromagnetic weapons to see how hardened they are before they're good to go. Those are man-made, and they're manned with people.
And are these similar to like Tic Tac stuff, the Tic Tac UFOs?
They're all shapes.
They're all different shapes. Eggs?
They're octagonal. They're discs. They're the ones that are Northrop Grumman and Raytheon generally, not all, tend to be triangular or trapezoidal. Or they're not necessarily equilateral triangles.
Okay.
Isosceles, and many of the ones that are cigar-shaped or tic-tac-shaped or discs or octagonal are Lockheed Skunk Works, EG&G, and some others. So all the prime contractors that we know of where we have sources are named in the briefing document. And I've been building that list for 30 years, ever since I was asked to put it together. And, the problem is, and this gets to sort of a gut check here, of what are you going to do about it? Because let's say you're the president, or if I was on Patrick Bet-David's show a couple of days ago, he was a big podcaster and a great guy. And he asked me, he said, well, do you think the president is the most powerful man in the world? I said, well, he could be, but he isn't. he showed a clip of Mr. Trump saying he is. But when they realize what they're up against with this, the power you're talking about derives from extraordinary technological prowess. So to make this real for people, I was told this is sort of apocryphal, but in 1997, excuse me, I was asked to do a stand-up briefing for, and this document leaked, a report about this leaked out of Edgar Mitchell's archive when he died. But my military advisor, who I'll be seeing tomorrow, who's retired, and I and Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man to walk on the moon, and an Eisenhower era whistleblower,
Right.
and my assistant, Sherry Adamek, were in attendance. But I was asked to do a stand-up briefing for Admiral Tom Wilson, who is J2, the head of Intelligence Joint Staff. And, prior to the briefing, I'd sent over something similar to this, but different. But one of the documents that was in there is in here, and it's a National Reconnaissance Office, NRO, which is the big entity that runs all the spy satellites, document from Area 51, Nellis, warning of civilians trying to spy on the range where they test and do the research on the man-made UFOs, right? And they didn't want that to get out. But in that, it's not been declassified, but it's legit. And it lists the project code numbers and names, right? So, and it's a 91 document. This meeting's in 97, so it wasn't antique, right? So I have someone hand deliver it to the admiral prior to the meeting. So he starts digging into this, and he hits pay dirt. He finds a few key offices where this is going on. He calls them up and he says, hey, I want to be read into this. And he says, I'm Admiral Tom Wilson. I'm J2, head of Intelligence Joint Staff. And they say, sir, we can't discuss this with you. And you don't have a need to know. Mm-hmm. And of course, his reaction was, well, God damn it. I mean, I'm the head of intelligence with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. How can I not have a need to know?
Right.
Excuse my language. But I mean, this is like mind-blowing.
Right.
All right. So then he gets threatened, and he's threatened with being demoted, where they take a star off your lapel and put you out to pasture with much lower benefits and pay and retirement.
Yeah. Let's be real. 2025 has been all about change. And a big change for me is how I've been dealing with the world, these mind-blowing guests, and general life stress. And it's all thanks to these incredible gummies produced by our sponsor, Via. Trusted by over 500,000 happy customers, Via is the Swiss Army knife of wellness, dedicated to harnessing the natural benefits of hemp to create high-quality wellness products. With award-winning THC and THC-free gummies, Via has a dosage to encourage your comfort. No need to block off hours of the day for an unproductive high when you can experience the full spectrum benefits from hemp and hemp products with a microdose of THC to give you a little boost without compromising your responsibilities. Via is also well renowned for their award-winning THC and THC-free vapes, THCA flower, soothing topicals, and calming drops, all crafted with the highest quality hemp sourced from trusted, independently owned American farms. Personally, I like to break them up into quarters and take them after a long podcast when I'm overstimulated and want to relax and wind down with my family, or when I'm trying to get creative late at night, maybe doing writing or watching a documentary or preparing for a podcast. It's great to get my mind flowing and in a creative state. Via is the only lifestyle hemp brand. They are experts at using compounds found in hemp along with the active plant extracts to produce targeted effects. It's incredible. And the best part, Via legally ships to nearly all states in the US in discreet packaging directly to your door with a worry-free guarantee. No medical card required. So if you're 21 plus, check out the link to Via in our description below and use the code Danny to get 15% off. And if you're new to Via, get a free gift card of your choice. After your purchase, they're going to ask where you heard about them, and please support the show by telling them we sent you. This year, enhance your everyday with Via.
So he backed off of it. But at the end of the meeting, and it was supposed to be 45 minutes. I think it went on for 2 or 3 hours. He kept canceling appointments. I asked him, I said, we need your help. I'm just an emergency doctor doing this because I'm interested, but it's serious stuff. And he asked me, who else has had this happen to them? I said, well, the Secretary of Defense, the CI director, the president. He said, well, what am I going to do? I said, yeah, but you're here key in the military, in the Pentagon. And he says, no, here's what I've learned. And this is how he said it. He says, I've learned that the best thing I have in the normal constitutional government and military is a B-2 stealth. And that organization have craft that are anti-gravity that can do circles. He did like this, circles around my B-2 stealth. He says it's point, set, match. He said, we're checkmated because of the technology. So now we're into the horns of the dilemma right here because, I realized going up against corrupt interests that have that level of technology, which is very dangerous. And when I literally tell people the threat from that organization, which is international, have these technologies, far exceeds the threat of China, Iran, Russia, terrorism, and by order of magnitude. And no one's doing anything about it because no one has quite figured out what the threat matrix is, what the threat assessment. So what we're trying to do, not to scare the hell out of these officials, but to say, here's the problem, here's a solution. Now, the solution, the best outcome of this that we're recommending is a glide path out that's not kinetic. In other words, not violent. It's not a red on black war or something. It's giving people who want to come forward a path out, and they take it, and it unravels that system, and it gets transformed into another initiative. That those old legacy programs that have been going along without any accountability for 60 plus years, those are put out to pasture. So, and wound down. But it's got to happen that way or it's going to be a mess.
Are you saying that these organizations that are in possession of this technology and that control this stuff, that are keeping it away from the U.S. government, are they like their own autonomous government, slash military slash Air Force that is completely detached from any other world government?
They're detached and embedded at the same time. So it's,
and almost and more, arguably more powerful.
Oh, way more. Absolutely way more. This is why, it's interesting when Jimmy Carter, I was asked not to tell this story. He's passed away now. So
he's just adjusting your camera.
When President Carter was some years ago in Spain signing guitars, it was a classical guitarist who was there, told me this, who's part of our team. And he said that afterwards, it was a fundraiser for the Carter Center,
okay.
And they were auctioning off these guitars, and
right.
The president signed them. And at a dinner afterwards, there were a few people there, and someone asked him, they said, "Sir, what was it like being the most powerful man in the world?" And President Carter says, "I wasn't that man." And they go, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, there are certain things that I had no control over and I wasn't even allowed to know about." And someone giggled, "Oh, you're joking. Well, you mean things like UFOs?" And he said, "Yes, that and more." So that was, of course, he was president 76 to 80. Took off 77 January and left in 81. Then Reagan came in.
Right.
So once you understand that, then you go, well, who is minding the store here? Well, it's sort of like if you remember a brilliant guy, Senator Inouye of Hawaii, who did the Iran-Contra hearings.
Right.
And he said there exists a secret government, shadow government, with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own funding mechanism that's free from the law and above the law itself. I'm paraphrasing, but that clip is in our archive. And years later, after I did the original Disclosure Project conference in 2001, an attorney on our team who was then an intern, undergraduate intern, met with Senator Inouye, and we had just done the National Press Club event in 2001,
right
before 9/11, and this attorney, Derek Garcia, has written an affidavit to this effect. He talked to Senator Inouye. He says, yes, and, like basically these UFO issues, that's the crown jewel of this shadow secret government operation.
Right.
And it is above the Constitution and the law. But the kinds of technologies they have. I mean, we're not talking about a jet aircraft or a rocket. You know, I tell people rockets were cool up until 1954. So if you think of SpaceX rockets, all get out, you're only 70 years behind the times, bro. So, but and that's fact. But this means that you have an organization. You know, one of the initials on that NRO document was MAGIC. Stands for Majority Joint Intelligence Committee, or MAGI, M-A-J-I.
Ooh, Magi. That's fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you think that any of these witnesses are strategic disinfo? Like, if I was the secret government that had control of this stuff, I would deliberately inject some bullshit into this and I would absolutely put some fake whistleblowers out there.
Yep. And that's something we have to we've had this happen a couple times. Right before we did the meeting for Admiral Wilson, we had a gathering offsite for members of Congress. And the chairman of the House Oversight Committee was there, Dan Burton, and all those people. And we found out the night before, and I don't credit myself with this, my military advisor, who has to be nameless, and Edgar Mitchell, another person, was sitting at a bar with this guy. And he started telling things that they knew were factually not true. Mm-hmm. So I got word of that. I was already up in my room, and I said, that person is removed and escorted off the properties immediately, and if necessary, by force. So that person was ejected from the meeting that was happening the next day with these members of Congress. So, yeah, of course. I mean, that's something we always watch for. And, you know, I'm not 100%, but I'm certain that what I'm sharing with you about this is true. And I don't rely on one source. So in other words, the crazier the count is, the more I want to hear from multiple corroborating witnesses that don't know each other. So there's no collusion. So that's what we've tried to build with this mosaic, this disclosure mosaic to create the picture.
Yeah.
Because you could always have 2 or 3 people who worked with each other that confabulate the same nonsense, right? So it's...
Now, that's something that happened with this recent fella that was just on Jesse Michaels' podcast, Jake Barber, I believe his last name is.
Oh, I know Jake very well.
Yeah, he mentioned you. Fantastic little documentary that Jesse Michaels put together. And Michael Herrera, I believe.
Yeah.
And he mentioned during that interview that Jake, and I'm probably butchering this, I don't remember it perfectly, but he said that he was a part of some secret black program going to one of your conferences to try to subvert some of your witnesses.
A year and a half ago.
Some of your Oh, that was a year and a half ago. And then when he heard this guy Michael Herrera's testimony, he said, "Holy shit, that's exactly what I was doing."
Yep.
That's like I saw this with my own eyes. Yep. And then he said he had some coming to Jesus moment where he said, "Oh no, I can't do this. I have to go against the grain here."
No, he's legit. No, he's I know his cover. I know who he worked for. I've been at the facilities.
Jake
Barber and his team, and Fred and also Don Paul, great guys, and they're not gaslighting anyone. Now, they're not sharing everything either because it's dangerous. But now there's some unsavory people that I think have attached themselves to these guys. The Lou Elizondo crowd and the whole disinformation nexus of retail.
Yeah, I want to get to that.
Ufology.
I want you to explain that to me later. I don't want to interject that right now, but that's something I would definitely want to put a pin in.
Yeah. Well, it's just it's the way the world works, man. In 1 part information, 9 parts disinformation.
Right.
1 part truth. And by the way, the best disinformation, false information, is sort of like a poison pill. It's coated in real information, and you swallow it, and then you're done, right? So this technique of counterintelligence, I'm quite versed in, and how it operates, and how the PSYOP, psychological warfare operations, run these operations on people who are innocent, good people. But Herrera, by the way, had approached me some years ago, and Michael Herrera was a Marine. For people who don't know, you can go to our archive and see this account and the illustration of what he saw.
Okay. Can you explain it for people who don't?
Sure.
Oh.
So it was in, I believe, 2009. And he was a young Marine, I think 20 years old. And there was a tsunami and earthquake in Indonesia, and they were on an expeditionary force, a humanitarian mission, to go there and help people and out of the Pacific. They were in the Pacific region. And he and 5 of his platoon buddies went off in a direction, and in the jungle, there was a clearing, and there was a 300-foot diameter man-made UFO, basically octagonal.
He knew this, it was man-made? He knew that it was man-made?
Oh, he could tell it was man-made, and it was manned by special operations guys, but in civilian garb. They were told, basically put down your weapons. They confiscated their weapons. They took their IDs. They threatened to kill them for seeing this. And one of the things he saw,
they threatened to kill their own U.S. Marines.
Well, they're not their own. This is this shadow secret government.
Right, okay.
I mean, those are the real people committing treason and are traitors. And yes, they'll kill their own. I mean, look at Jonathan Wygant's testimony when he was in the Peruvian-Bolivian border where we shot down an ET craft. And he and his guys came across it first, and the security people who were in there to retrieve it said, you talk about this, we'll throw you out of the helicopter and they'll never find you in the jungle. So this happens all the time. They do kill their own people, but they're not their own people.
They're Americans though, right?
Yeah, they're Americans, but it's, these are people who are running a criminal enterprise, the biggest, think of the mafia. It's the largest criminal organization on the planet. So, when the FBI is ready and wants to grow up and be serious, they have a real target here.
With technology that very few human beings can comprehend.
So the other thing that Michael Herrera saw was this crate. And it looked like it had like a little oxygen and HVAC mini portable unit on it. And he thought they were running drugs. And it turned out, because Jake was at this conference to try to bump witnesses and see who need to be turned over for either wet works or arrest, he heard this. And, of course, he immediately texted me because he has my number. And we went to the green room.
Jake did?
Yeah. And his security guy.
So he knew you.
Oh, yeah.
But he was going to your conference to subvert some of your witnesses.
Well, that's what his job was. It was to stop leaks and find out if I had the Panasonic Tough book that had gone missing out of one of these corporations. I know which one it is, that had all this intel on it because I received stuff all the time, right? And he thought maybe I had it. Now, I didn't know that's why he was there, right? And prior to that, I'd had a meeting with one of his security people at a bar near Langley and near CIA, Tyson's Corner in Virginia. And he gave me a little thumb drive that was like a 10-page description of his involvement and what he was doing. And he subsequently, a month or two later, came June 2023 to this Disclosure Project conference and press conference we did where Herrera and some other whistleblowers were speaking. But he immediately said, I need to see you. So I go back to the green room. And he says, that isn't drugs. Those are people. And so what they were doing, the way they get their psionic and other staff, let's call it, at these underground facilities, is that, let's say there's a terrible disaster or war-torn area. And people are desperate. And they're not kidnapped per se, but it's under duress. They're basically told, you can either come with us and be part of our program. Well, I'll describe it in a moment. Or you can stay here and die. You choose. Now, I wouldn't call that but this is how this is brutal stuff, right?
Oh, yeah.
And that's what was in those crates. These are people. And they were people who were candidates for being...
How do they discern what kind of people they need?
They were looking for people with a certain demographic that they felt would have a high psionic capability.
And am I correct in saying they were children?
They were children. There were women. Somehow there's a tendency for left-handedness for that ability, and gay and bisexual men. So that's who they were looking for, because like Ingo Swann was, I knew him very well. Ingo was, and he was a gay guy, brilliant remote viewer. So, and who cares? I mean, people get hung up on that. It's
like if you're gay, raise your hand. If you're left-handed, we need you.
No, they don't do it that way. Let's not be silly. But I mean, they'll scope out, and then they'll say and of course it's a rough sort of assessment. They're then crated up, taken to a facility, and the ones that pass muster for their psionic, psychic capabilities, go through a program. Now, a lot of those end up dying because they're put on drugs, and dopamine, electromagnetic enhancement. So many end up dying or put in comas. And
Wait. Hold on.
Man.
So they're getting these people. So this specific situation, Michael Herrera was in Indonesia after there was an earthquake. They essentially, you don't want to say kidnapped because that's not a nice way of putting it, but it's essentially kidnapped him. And
taken under some duress. I mean, come with us or die, right? I mean, I don't know. You can call that whatever you want.
It sounds like some level of human trafficking. Brought these children to a secret base, secret black site that they control for psychic warfare,
and for training to be psionic hijackers of ET craft. That's just the next part of it.
And they trained him to be psionic. What is so? Yeah,
Well,
to hijack these craft. And you're saying that they gave them drugs. What kind of drugs do they give them, and why do they give them drugs?
I don't have the whole protocol. I just know that they were dopamine related, and also there were electromagnetic systems, and there were a lot of bad outcomes. But the ones who passed through it have an extraordinary capability, but it's an enhanced. So basically, the way they described it to me is that you have the people who are the operators, say the regular human covert folks.
Right.
These people are humans that are sort of machine tools that are then used to then tap into the guidance and control systems of these ET craft, because they're using what I just described, technology assisted consciousness, where they're, you think to it. You see these accounts of the ET standing there touching something, they just think and it goes there. So okay, I know this is getting out there, but it's Oh, it totally makes sense. And of course, this goes back to my 1973 experience with the ETs, where I knew this is what they were using. So, and I believe that's why in 1992, General Stubblebine personally offered me $2 billion to be part of his little freak show, by the way.
What?
Yeah. I said, no, gracias. I mean,
he offered you $2 billion?
$2 billion in 1992 dollars, yeah.
Why did you say no?
Well, because I'm not a corrupt person.
Oh my God, $2 billion. That'd be hard for me to
I save lives for a living. I don't want to be part of a cabal of sociopaths and psychopaths destroying the planet, right?
What did he say you had to do
price.
for the $2 billion?
I'd be part of his team, a senior member of his team, because of my abilities and also being a doctor with these capabilities. I mean, they were going to.
And who was he exactly?
He had been.
I'm not familiar with him.
Head of INSCOM, and he was head of Army Intelligence. And General Albert Stubblebine III. And Bert approached me, and then I said, not only no, but hell no. And then he went to my wife. We're about to have our 46th anniversary, and he tried to sweet talk her into this madness. And thought he was very nice. I said, no, devils speak with forked tongue. But
and what did he do? Why was he such an evil person?
Oh, he was part of that whole group of folks. He was like, he's passed away, but he was part of the same kind of group that people like Colonel Alexander and Elizondo. They're all part of that whole operation. They have different roles, but his role was to interface from that black illegal program world with the UFO subculture. Back then, this is like 33 years ago, right? So
psychological information manipulation, trying to handle the perception, the public perception of this stuff in the United States is basically what he wanted you to help him do.
Yes, but also be part of that operational team is what I think, in terms of these capabilities. Because he knew that he approached me right after there was proof that our CE5 contact had worked. And there were these 4 ET craft that appeared here in Florida, up outside Pensacola. So that is when he surfaced, exactly then. Now, of course, everyone makes fun of us for doing that. Oh, it's Ouija board stuff. I said, like the hell it is. You think these civilizations are using your iPhone? Why would they be using 20th century and early 21st century communications technologies? They're using stuff like Elon would like to do, Musk would like to do with Neuralink, except without the wires, right? Not at the speed of light, at the speed of thought. Like that.
Right.
All right? Instant. So that program has been in development for decades, but it reached the level of success, let's call it. I mean, if you can call hijacking ET craft and then blowing them out of the sky with electromagnetic pulse weapons, which are illegal, by the way.
I just can't get over $2 billion. You're a better man than me.
Yeah.
I might have been doing it. I would have saluted and been a psyop, fucking head of psyops.
I'm not interested in that. Look, I mean, I'm not rich, but I'm comfortable as a doctor. I don't need that, and I've never had aspirations for that.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I say it all the time.
Whether
people in the comments who think I'm CIA funded podcast. If the CIA wants to offer me $1 million, sign me up.
Well, that's the joke. I mean, I've bootstrapped this whole effort for 35 years with a handful of people and no office and, a couple, some volunteers and 1.5 staff members and my wife and me. So I said, oh yeah, if I were if I were that guy,
do you ever
I wouldn't be doing this,
Do you ever think back, like just laying in bed late at night, be like, God damn it, maybe I should have taken that $2 billion?
No, never. Never, because then you're owned. You're an owned asset. I value my
but maybe
freedom. I value my freedom more than I value all the money on earth.
Did he offer it in payments, or was it like an upfront lump sum?
No, the way he described it is that after the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union was falling apart in the late 80s, early 90s, that they had seized a bunch of assets in Eastern Europe, and they had a slush fund, and that I would have control and access of that, and it was a lot of money. And look, the kind of black budget money these guys have, it's enormous. There's another guy who told me in 93, a couple months before I briefed the CIA director, and he was technically involved with the UFO subculture, but he was a tech guy who was embedded with this shadow government. And he said, look, we have given at least 10,000 people $10 million apiece or more to secure their cooperation with what we're doing. And then he made another offer to me. And this was about 1.5 years after General Stubblebine. So I said, no, thank you. I don't want to go that route. I want to stay independent and free. But and
I would imagine the disinfo people, they probably target media personalities.
Oh, sure.
They probably target podcasts, maybe, if they're still doing it.
Absolutely.
If they're still, I mean, imagine what they were doing with Richard Doty in like, what was it, the 70s, 80s?
Yeah.
With Paul Benowitz and the level they went to go to these UFO conferences and try to get these people and say, hey, I'm going to give you some secrets if you just go out there and get us some intel on these people. And meanwhile, the secrets they're giving them are like half-baked bullshit.
Have you ever seen the documentary Unacknowledged that we did? It's had about 800, 900 million people.
I don't think I've seen that one, no. I watched Sirius.
Unacknowledged is the one that prompted them to shove Elizondo out into the public from his counterintelligence operation at the Pentagon. It's had well over 800 million people see it. And in that, we interview Mr. Doty. And he admits to carrying bags of cash to people.
Oh, yes, I have seen this. I've seen this clip.
And he also admits that there were abduction programs that we were doing. But then he got really scared. He said, I can't talk about that.
Right.
But I have multiple people who confirm that. Now, we also have a book in 92 that Jacques Vallée wrote, who's a very well-known researcher on this. He's an astronomer, astrophysicist, I think. And he admits to having a document from the CIA from 1985.
Jacques Vallée?
Mm-hmm. And go look at it. This is in the briefing where he admits that this document he won't release it. I think he's been threatened. And it talks about the agency, the CIA, going down to Argentina and Brazil, abducting peasants, making it look like aliens were abducting them, using these advanced technology systems for its, and I'm quoting, the psychological warfare value. So imagine how easy, it's like taking candy from a baby in the amateur UFO research subculture to stage this stuff and get everyone at Twitter talking about how the aliens did X, Y, and Z. And they're staging, it's called stagecraft. I know what the technologies are. I have debriefed people who are operational on the man-made UFOs doing it. The cattle mutilations have nothing to do with ETs. It's all us. That we can prove. So the
Project Gasbury or something, where they detonated in the 70s. They detonated a subterranean nuke, and they had helicopters going out and basically is this correct? Where they were mutilating cattle and they were doing surgical operations and taking out certain parts of the cattle, the tongue, the glands and trying to determine whether they had been infected with this sort of radiation, whether the food and the crops and the cattle had been infected with this stuff.
Well, that's one operation. There's another operation to get substrate material, biological growth material,
Right.
for their little weird gray and other reptilian looking, the man-made ETs, right? Because some of them are not just robotic, some are. But the more advanced ones are sort of what they call bio-nano machines. So they have a biological and a technological component, but they're man-made. And people go, sounds too far out. I say, but wait, imagine what kind of, if you have that kind of mad scientist mentality, it's like Dr. Strangelove, and you've got the virtually limitless funding, black budget and otherwise, criminal, drug running, everything.
Yeah.
And you've got ET technologies that you're studying for decades. You're going to be able to come out with a whole constellation of dirty tricks to fool people.
It's so interesting to detangle this stuff, though.
Well, that's my job, is to try to make sense out of this madness.
And from my understanding of the cattle mutilation is the Atomic Energy Commission, like when they did that, I think it was in '67, where they detonated the subterranean nuke to find natural gas reserves in Dulce, New Mexico. What they did was the cattle mutilation was like a monitoring program to assess radiation leakage in the ecosystem or whatever. And at the same time, they were testing some of this exotic aircraft over the same location. The people started to think, oh my God, these aircraft are doing this to the cattle. It's aliens. So they said, oh, the people are saying that? We're going to keep flying our aircraft over those cattle testing mutilation deals. So that was like insane level of just public perception.
But that's common. And then all you have to do is have someone write, an alien harvest like Linda Moulton Howe, or you have people write abduction books. And what's interesting, the very people who are setting this up will guide those victims. And they are victims. I'm not saying these abduction people aren't real. They have been victimized. But they haven't been taken by extraterrestrials. They've been taken by covert human special operations made to look alien.
Right.
So it's a look-alike, right? So those programs, they sell, and the media, which is as corrupt as anything you can imagine, the legacy media, a lot of those people, they're, like I will be absolutely not only shadow banned, but banned to tell the truth on a lot of media. Whereas if you're going forward telling a lie, boom, you're on 60 Minutes. Boom, you're on. That's true, because the big media is, I think, probably more corrupt than any other institution in the United States or the world. And being controlled by these interests.
Yeah, but how do they? I understand how the media is controlled by advertising dollars, but how do you think they're controlled by these rogue military aerospace companies?
Money and control, payment.
They're backdooring money to them.
They're Knox. They have a non-official cover. By day and public persona, they're a media person. They're actually working with the agency or some other entity that's part of this compartmented shadow government. And, I know people like that. I mean, probably if I had taken the money, I would have been one of those guys, right?
Yeah.
So, that's how that works. And it makes, one of the problems with Washington is everyone's so busy doing a million different things. They have 99 things to do every day. And this thing, as you pointed out at the beginning, and you're right, is such a confusing mess of conflicting information that they just go, I don't want to hear it. It is too complicated, right? But that is part of the reason they've made it complicated. It's obfuscating. It hides it.
Yeah, exactly.
By making it just incomprehensible.
It's impossible to know what's real.
We have to make it understandable and kind of, I liken this to the epiphany moment in The Wizard of Oz when Dorothy and whoever, the scarecrow, and they pull back the curtain. And there's this old crudmudgeon pulling the levers, right? That's what this is. So, part of what we have to do is not just say, here's the evidence for NHI craft and people, extraterrestrial craft and people, but here's the other part of it. Here's the dominant information, disinformation, that's out in ufology, in the media, in documentaries, in films, and books, has actually been staged by the very people trying to keep it secret. So that you're looking over here and not the truth.
Yeah.
And they're very good at doing this, Danny. They're extremely good at it.
One of my favorite stories was from Annie Jacobson in her Area 51 book, where she interviewed the CIA pilots who were test flying the first jet planes over the Air Force Base, and they said they purposely brought gorilla masks in the cockpit for, in the chance that they flew by a civilian aircraft, they put the gorilla mask on so that they're poisoning that story already. So if the guy goes to the bar later, because dude, I saw a monkey flying a jet plane.
Well, and the early abductions in the late 50s, early 60s, they had the man-made UFOs and they had some guys very short stature or not quite looking normal, and they're kind of like Hollywood. You can make a guy look like Darth Vader or whatever. That they had that stagecraft, and it was incredibly convincing. Because even now you look at one of our witnesses, whistleblowers who came forward a year and a half ago, Stephen Digna. He was at Fort Irwin, California in 2000. And he was called out by some Raytheon guys to look at some objects that were out over the range. And they had to cancel their live fire exercises because of this. And it was a triangular, not quite equilateral, more of a pointed triangular craft. And they didn't know he picked up a pair of night vision scopes. And he looked at it, and he saw the detail on it. And then he saw that there were several others that were holographic projections of the real one. And so it looked like there was a fleet of them.
Yeah.
And this is how you stage a fake alien attack.
Yeah. They had this was all part of that declassified Northwoods thing where they were trying to stage a fake invasion over Cuba.
Well, no, this was a separate incident, but it's very similar
to that. Yeah.
It's very similar. And so they were very upset that he figured that out, right? And the Raytheon guys, a few days later, abducted him and his wife on coming back from a movie, back to the base on this road out in California, remote road. And if anyone who would have seen that craft and what happened would have sworn it was a alien vehicle, and it was Raytheon. Now, he suffered terrible damages. He's very damaged. He's very sick. So, that is what happens if you get too close to the truth. And he's an incredibly sweet man, very courageous. He's totally telling the truth. But I would say if you took 1 million people on Earth and showed them that craft, that Raytheon object craft in 2000, this is 25 years ago, right?
Right.
I don't think one person would think that it was man-made. And this is a problem for the National Security Council and the president, because everyone assumes that what I'm telling you, they know. They don't. If you've seen the documentary Unacknowledged, you know more about this subject than virtually anyone in the U.S. Congress, except the bad apples who are on the payroll of the shadow secret government.
Right. Well,
So this is a problem. I mean, if you want to live in a free society, in a democracy, you can't have something this important, completely ignored by your elected officials, right?
And also the benefit of having so much bullshit out there is if the truth does get out, it doesn't fucking matter, because what are the chances that they're going to pick that as being the truth?
Well, that's now you're very smart, because you just hit the nail in the coffin. What keeps me up at night
and that's why I don't trust any of these whistleblowers, because I don't think.
Well, I know the ones I know, and now here's someone like Mr. Grush. He was telling 100% the truth until he started telling tall tales that were being fed to him by Lou Elizondo, right? About how the aliens had blown up villages in, I don't know, South America or someplace. That was
Elizondo told him that?
Yeah. So he fell into that disinformation trap along with the information trap. But a lot of people do that. And why?
Right.
Because those guys will say, hey, I can get you a $10 million book or movie deal, and I can get you on 60 Minutes. So, there are advantages to going with those folks as opposed to doing it, let's call it clean. Because doing it clean is a hard path. I mean, it's been a big struggle for me and my family, and, you have all kinds of problems because of it. But I don't regret it. I mean, I wouldn't do anything different at all. But it's dangerous, and it's very ungratifying. From a personal point of view, nobody would do it, except I feel that this is something, if this doesn't get resolved properly, what Werner von Braun warned about, right? He said, look, the whole plan is to stage an alien threat so we can unite the world around this sort of fascist, totalitarian, militaristic sort of thing. It's like the movie Independence Day, right? And Will Smith, let's go kick alien butt. And you see the Arabs and everybody in the world united to fight the aliens. So that's right out of CIA PSYOP scripting. And guess what? 99% of legacy ufology, that's the narrative. They're the good aliens and the bad ones. So it's Star Wars, right? It's all that narrative. And I go, at least members of Congress are saying, look, if these civilizations were hostile, given that their technologies are hundreds of thousands of years more advanced than ours, we'd be gone. We'd be a charcoal briquette floating through space. Now, do they have, this is not to say, I'm not naive, this is not to say that those civilizations don't have some self-interest. Because what would you think? I mean, just put yourself in the shoes and through the eyes of an ET. And you come across this planet, and in a few decades, it goes from, muskets and machine guns to thermonuclear weapons to
pointing at the heads of each other
to very advanced electromagnetic weapons, including the so-called scalar ones that are knocking ET craft down. And then the same group going off the reservation of any controls reverse engineers your ET technologies and start using it against you. Got it? That's the crisis that no one's talking about. Because and Jake and people like him will say, it's at the point now where they just say AT, the advanced technologies humans have, to most people on Earth would be indistinguishable from an ET vehicle or NHI craft. And there's a big risk there because, number one, they could stage a false flag attack and everyone would think it was alien, which is what their plan is. That's what the drones were all about, by the way. I mean, Mr. Trump got that wrong when his press secretary commented on that. We know what that was. That was that was a PSYOP.
It was a PSYOP?
100%.
Coordinated by who?
By the same people who are trying to be sure that when this comes out this year and next, that it's done with the specter of fear. We don't know. People look at the skies. Oh, I'm afraid.
They look just like hobby drones. Like they looked like they weren't moving crazy at all.
Well, no, I know a team that was under contract with Lockheed Martin that has some images of some of this stuff, and some of them are pretty amazing. And some of the daytime ones that they've captured. Now, they're not extraterrestrial. They're our advanced stuff. But again, and some have said, well, these are originating from China. But that's a misnomer because this shadow government entity is transnational. You can label whatever country you want. It doesn't matter. It operates. When I was the first time I went to meet with the latest efforts about 3 years ago, at the Senate Intelligence Committee, SCIF, and I went in there and I said, see that map of the world? Erase all the geopolitical boundaries, like the boundary between Canada and the United States or Mongolia and China or whatever.
Yeah.
This organization, the world is their oyster. They don't care about that. So now, the truth is, people like Jake Barber and his guys are patriots who got stuck in that system, as I said, and they deserve a clean path out, a safe path out. And that's what has to happen. That's got to happen from the Congress and from the president's executive orders, which I've seen some drafts of those. And
so, yeah,
and they're in here. Their recommendations are in here for what those need to be, and they need to be done yesterday.
We kind of just got really sidetracked down a crazy rabbit hole after we started talking about Jake and Michael Herrera's situation, where they were extracting these people out.
Yeah, and he's the only guy who I've ever heard about who saw something like that and was not killed. He only survived. His guys, yes, absolutely. It's a miracle he wasn't killed. And I told him that. I said, you have no idea how rare it is for someone like you, a kid, 20 years old, seeing something like that, for them not to just erase you,
So yeah, I remember from that story, Jake was like saying, the guys were saying, should we smoke these guys? Should we smoke these guys? Blah, blah, blah. And they ended up not doing that.
No.
So they're taking these children from foreign countries, these underdeveloped places,
and adults.
and adults. But the primary reason is because they are out of a civilized environment, they're not in like a metropolitan city. They're not around technology all the time. They're in a completely native environment, and they're eating, I don't know, maybe unprocessed foods, natural foods. So they're more connected to nature somehow. And that somehow makes them more in tuned to this psychic consciousness, the psionic stuff that he's talking about. And they put them in this program, give them dopamine drugs, and hook them up to all kinds of technology and use them to summon these eggs. This is what he said. Summon the eggs.
Well, not just the eggs. It's all different types of craft. But it's not, it's more than just summon.
Okay.
So let me unpack this a little more.
Okay.
Years ago, you heard about this weird looking drone that kind of looked like a UFO that the Iranians were able to break into its guidance system and land and then study to reverse engineer it.
I never heard about this.
Oh, it was all in the media. So, but if you look into that.
Steve, maybe you can find it. What year?
I can't remember. It was in the last
Iranian drone that was caught.
Ours that they intercepted and hijacked it basically by wire.
Iran did?
Yes, and landed it at a base in Iran and then studied the reverse engineering.
You got to find this shit, dude.
Yeah, but that it was a drone. It was not a UFO, but
Right.
it looked weird. It was a very unusual shape, and now imagine being able to do that with this instead of guide by wire, right?
Right there. U.S. drone recovered by Iran, 2011.
I'm sure there have been multiple.
Ooh, here we go.
Yeah, see what a strange looking one.
Sophisticated spy planes. U.S. intelligence is spying
Can you full screen it?
intensely on Iranian sites believed to be developing nuclear weapons and long-range missiles. Bob Orr tells us an unmanned U.S. drone did vanish over the weekend.
The secret stealth drone, nicknamed the Beast of Kandahar, is one of America's most sophisticated intelligence tools. For the past 4 years, the RQ-170 has flown high-altitude surveillance missions over the battlefields in Afghanistan.
Okay, I
and
get
its
it.
border
All right,
with
so here's
Pakistan.
my point in this is that this sort of nonsense happens all the time.
Yeah.
What my point of it is, they were able to break into the encrypted, hardened guidance system because these are all flown, a lot of them out of Nellis or bases out in the desert underground, and they're unmanned, but they're on the other side of the world. But they were able to break into that system, the command and control guidance, and land it. They didn't crash
Now,
it.
did they do that with this consciousness stuff?
No, they didn't. I'm using this as an analogy if I can get through my sentence. So that's an analogy. Now imagine having an interstellar vehicle, an HI craft, and their technologies are consciousness, thought interfacing. So you train these people to basically hack into their guidance system when no one's looking, and you hijack it. Instead of landing it, you bring it over to an area. Sometimes you can land the ET craft, but often what they do is they hit it with an electromagnetic pulse weapon, and it either is disabled and falls to the ground, or it's blown to pieces. Now, what I was getting ready to tell you is that in these same areas, they'll put up a TFR, which is basically a temporary flight restriction area over an area of airspace. Mm-hmm. If there is a civilian aircraft that strays into that, and they're using these electromagnetic pulse weapons, they will blow the innocent civilian Cessna out of the sky. And I know this for a fact. Sometimes the electromagnetic pulse goes outside the TFR and hits a totally aircraft that was trying to stay out of the TFR. So now we have over the continental United States a real threat to air traffic, which are always blaming it on the aliens. No, the real threat to air traffic are the man-made UFOs and these sort of operations because these are not always done over permanent flight restriction areas like a top secret Air Force base. Yeah. They're done in these other places, right? So this is a real problem. I brought it up to officials in Washington. And what's astounding to me, I want to vent a little bit here. I've been blowing the whistle on this nonsense since 93. And you always wonder, I think we have something called the FBI or law enforcement. Now, we can prove through our direct witnesses kidnapping, murder, treason, killing innocent civilians like I just described, embezzlement of U.S. federal dollars into black projects without oversight and oversight of the president or Congress. On and on. Half the federal penal code is being violated by this organization. Mm-hmm. And it's precisely where is the Congress and the White House and the FBI. So now that we have a new administration and a new Congress, and this is all beginning to come out, I think that the public listening need to contact their senators and House member and the White House and say, look, we need to get this resolved, but you need to enforce the law and protect, the American democracy, but also the American public. And that's not happening yet. And so that group goes unchecked while these terrible atrocities keep going. Now, what I would like to see happen is that those operations get wound down peacefully because there's, as I mentioned earlier, a glide path out to basically transform that mess into something that's forward-looking. And I think all the whistleblowers I know, that's what they want to see, because an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. And if you go kinetic, if you go into a violent confrontation with an organization that have assets that are way beyond anything, as Admiral Wilson said, that they can deploy, it's not going to be good.
Yeah,
could
you
it's a suicide mission.
What would it be like to go to war with one of these organizations?
I know exactly. And now I'm advising a group that has been asked to do exactly that if it comes to it. And I don't want to talk about operational details about it.
A U.S. military group?
I won't talk about what agency or what entity it is.
Okay.
But it's a SAP, it's TSSCI, Top Secret Special Compartment Information. And I've been asked to provide everything I can, and I will, and I have been. I've been doing this for 30-some years. But now we have a critical mass of people who have details. I haven't even talked about some of the whistleblowers that are still behind the curtain that could be brought in and who know of multiple places. There was one gentleman who was about to come forward, and he got threatened, but he was read into 18 unacknowledged special access projects dealing with this. He had baseline clearance across 18 of them in a top secret Pentagon office. So we have people like that. They're living. They need to be protected. He's afraid of not only being killed, but his pension being erased because he signed an 80-year non-disclosure agreement that said that if he ever discussed any of this, that he would lose his freedom, but also his pension. And he's getting up in years. He has some war injuries. He's a hero. And I can't, what I never do is just shove someone like that out. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm a doctor, so if it's like a doctor-patient confidentiality. But at a certain point, the people who can protect people like him have a legal obligation. I will say that given what is in here, that the unredacted part, what people can get has some redacted, like this guy's name's redacted. Mm-hmm. But there is a dereliction of duty here if they don't deal with this. And I think the American public, they need to hear. I've had so many members of Congress and the Senate say, we really need to hear from our constituents on this, right? Now, people are so apathetic. They just think everything happens by itself. No, it doesn't. You got to create a movement. So I'm sort of an activist that way. You got to have people say, look, we want this resolved. We want this fixed yesterday. But we also want to bring out the technologies that would save the biosphere and eliminate poverty. Mm-hmm. So imagine, I don't think the things that are flying at 200,000 miles per hour should come out right now that are man-made, because that's a missile delivery system. You don't want every terrorist in Mogadishu having that to, boom, do something over downtown L.A. But the things that would sit on your table here and run this building from what's called the 0 point or quantum vacuum energy, that needs to come out. And that would then give us a civilization without pollution and without poverty within certainly your lifetime, maybe not mine because I'm almost 70 in June, but it would be an amazing leap forward. And so I think my 4 daughters and 12 grandkids would actually have a planet to live on instead of it just being ruined by these 1800s technologies we're using, you know? So that is the big peace dividend. Let's call it the big peace dividend of this all coming out, Danny, is that imagine a civilization without pollution and where your energy needs are met without cost. Once you have be like a heat pump or something smaller, provide all the energy for your car or your business or your house and with no bill, no electric bill. The problem with that, and this is what Patrick David said the other day to me, he said, no one wants that to come out because there goes trillions of dollars in assets, right? All the public utilities don't need them. All the oil, gas, coal, nuclear power don't need them.
Right.
An electric plug-in car like a Tesla don't need it.
Sure.
So, well, you could use the electric motor part, but though 900 pounds of lithium-ion batteries,
the idea is like
don't need it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Conventional transportation and petroleum industries that prop up our economy are going to be all of a sudden irrelevant if we have some crazy 0-point anti-gravity technology.
Well, again, the anti-gravity technology really can't come out right yet, but the other can and
The
should.
0-point energy.
Yeah, the 0-point, what I call the station, basically a power plant that generates energy. But you don't want something that's flying at that kind of maneuverability in the hands of unstable, failed states and whatnot. Now, I always point out to people, the worst people in the world have that technology now because these are rogue shadow government operators that are doing all these terrible things. And I think they have more terrible things they're planning to do, which I don't want to go into. But I think we ain't seen nothing yet from that crowd.
I wanted to ask you about Roswell, specifically because I've talked to Annie Jacobson about Roswell, and she wrote about it in her book. I'm sure you're familiar with what she said. There was an EG&G engineer that was a source for her, and he told her that it was a craft piloted by, remote controlled by the Soviet Union, and it had deformed children in there that were surgically altered by Mengele, or the Nazi Mengele, yeah. And it was crashed here to basically sow chaos. And she asked him, she's like, why the hell wouldn't you say this? This would make them look terrible. And it would be great for us if we, were able to expose this. And they would be completely humiliated on the world stage. And he said, because we started doing the same exact thing that they were doing.
Well, I'm not so sure of that because we have interviewed people who are now deceased who handled the bodies. And they most certainly were not that. So now, have there been events like that? Yes, and we've confirmed that Russia and probably China have these same technologies. And have they done stagecraft and hoax things? Very likely. But see, a one-source account, I know the EG&G folks. One of the G's is Greer. I'm not related, just on the record. But, again, a one-source no. But, and if you look at the people who were there at the retrieval site of the one that was not blown to smithereens, that was no man-made object. But in 1947, the only thing we had that would have been electrogravitic were ones that were unstable. So the what was called the disc that we brought over from Nazi Germany at the end of the war, that was not stable. And if you look at some of the old UFO home movies and you see it looks like they're like falling like a leaf like this, those are early man-made ones that didn't have the gyro, let's say, or the stable. They had not mastered the gravity control. That was 54, late 1954. So those craft would be very not that stable. But they were man-made. But if you look on the inside of them, like what's called the ARV that Brad Sorensen saw, and Mark McCandlish, who's passed away, illustrated for us and got the sort of good concept of the schematics. All the interior components, and this is late 50s, early 60s, were Mercury-era components when you looked at it. Now, it was electrogravitic. It had gone out into space before we landed on the moon. But it wasn't interstellar. And certainly, if it came to ground, it would be obvious it was man-made components, like right away. So I point out to people, one of the big confusions here is that, and it makes it easy once you understand there's the man-made and there's the non-human
Sure.
ET. But if you don't, and in here is a number of craft that are illustrated, and they're side by side where you see a man-made one versus an ET one.
Yeah.
But I will say,
Can I see that one?
well, I'd have to we'd be flipping around. But
Was Roswell man-made or was it ET?
that the one that's the famous case, and I think there may have been some cover cases that are mixed up. The 1945 White Sands event and that Roswell event were ET. There were, obviously, if you're out in that area, this is where you would be testing your prototype. So if we already had, remember, the Beefhill-Brown effect from the 1920s to 40s, and then we get the Nazi disc that was brought over by the billionaire Paul Mellon and General Patton and Allen Dulles, and it was a lot more advanced than anything we had in terms of gravity stability. So, and that's 45. So you can imagine in the 40s into the early 50s, there had been a number of these that would malfunction, go down. They wouldn't want people to know that we're working on that technology, and they would be love for people to think it was alien or ET.
Right.
So I think that, again, when you start getting into this sort of puzzle palace of information, disinformation, you have to first have a sort of a guidebook. And I liken this to being a doctor and having what we call differential diagnosis. So, someone comes in with chest pain. So a stupid doctor is going to say, oh, it's automatically a heart attack, when it could be dozens of things. It could be a dissecting thoracic aneurysm. It could be pleurisy. It could be a pulmonary embolus. It could be a strained muscle. So I think what's happening with the UFO subculture, they try to make everything one thing, and it isn't. It's several things going on simultaneously and being mixed up deliberately by very masterful counterintelligence and disinformation folks. Yeah, and they're very good at it.
I want to talk about the disinformation stuff and the Elizondo stuff, but I got to take a leak real quick, so we'll pause real quick.
Yep,
We'll be right back.
Absolutely.
All right, we're back. Sorry, I can't let. I gotta ask you that again. We were just talking about the quiet zone in West Virginia and how you do the CE5 protocols, and you said you let the ETs know that the Earth is armed.
Right. One of the protocols, if you get the app, it's CE5 Contact app. Anybody can get it. And part of the training, and when we're doing these sort of PSI, remote viewing contact, we let them know that they should only appear in any way that is safe and appropriate for that time, place, and group, and that the Earth has a lot of systems that can pick them up when they come out of, let's call it, trans-dimensional space-time into 3D. So if you're let's say you're an ET craft, you could be totally invisible to all sensors because you can shift, let's say, the resonant frequency of that whole craft, and everyone I can shift out of this dimension into a very higher frequency. So it's not 3D, but then it can pop into 3D. This is why people see them materialize and dematerialize. And when they're in the non-3D form, so they're not solid, you're not going to be able to strike them and down them as easily.
Right.
This is why we have so many weird phenomenon. It's funny, the CIA has a term, WSFM. It stands for Weird Science and Frickin' Magic. An engineer I know at Northrop Grumman just calls it pure fucking magic, PFM. And so when you start getting into either the high end of the electronics that are man-made or the interstellar extraterrestrial manifestations and phenomenon, you're dealing with some very strange stuff, right? And you would expect that, but it's not what people expect when they usually get introduced to this idea. So we make it very clear to these visitors that there are satellites that have what are called neutrino light detectors on them that started in the 70s that can pick them up when they drop out of, let's call it, trans-dimensional higher frequency into 3D. Boom, it's a signature. So there's a neutrino light scatter that happens. And there are Earth-based sensors, there are space-based, and aircraft. And so they'll pick these objects up, and then they'll triangulate them and hit them with one of these electromagnetic or scalar weapons. So because we're doing this, it's very different from what was going on that Jake Barber talked about.
Yeah.
We're not luring them over so we can hit them and kill them and reverse engineer their stuff. We're doing it as sort of a ambassadors, as it will, as civilian ambassadors from humans to them. So for peaceful contact. We're not doing it to get rich quick and make another widget. So
Are there beings inside these things?
Yes, not all of them. I mean, some are unmanned, and some have the equivalent of a android drone that's ET, because they know how dangerous Earth is.
And my brain just thinks wouldn't these beings that are so advanced, transdimensional ETs, don't they have better things to do than to interface with a couple people that are meditating in the middle of nowhere?
No, they don't, because if they're assigned to do something about the situation here, they need a point of contact, right? I mean, stop for a minute. The reason I started this whole project in 1990 was not the Disclosure Project. That was an accidental outgrowth of the main project.
It started with CE5.
It started with CE5 contact. And the reason for that was that I realized that it was either in complete denial, our society, our media, or most people in the government, or we were targeting them and killing them. There was no one on the earth setting up, let's call it, a peaceful outreach that would be, let's say, an ambassador level where you're just willing to be someone who does this out of goodwill to establish the beginnings of a relationship between humans and these other civilizations. And I realized no one was doing that. And so that's why I started this whole organization in 1990. It was not to do the Disclosure Project. I kind of got dragged kicking and screaming into that once I realized that, like most people, they think that the president and the Congress are in control of all these covert programs and they know what's going on. When I realized that how dangerous this organization is that had gone completely off the leash of any oversight, that's when I started doing the Disclosure Project. But that's not what I was mainly interested in.
But you have to warn these transdimensional ETs that they have to be careful for people beaming them out of the sky. Right?
We just do it as just a reminder, because we don't want to be responsible for the loss of life, whether it be human or ET. So, I'm a doctor, so above all, do no harm, right? I mean, the saying that doctors are supposed to live up to. So we don't want to set up a situation, and so it's not to say we think they're not monitoring this. It's just to remind them, and also don't be so willing to do something in this dimension because we're wanting this, right? Because humans are really wanting the ones that come on these events with me. They really want to make there are a lot of people who are very pure-hearted about it. They're not all just jerks, right, out there. We have wonderful people, millions of people who have been doing CE5 now. I mean, William Shatner got it and then went up in that space thing, and all these people. And so what we're wanting to do is show these civilizations there's another side of humanity that isn't a warmongering bunch of jerks wanting to blow them out of the sky, right? Mm-hmm. But who is doing that? The State Department? The UN? No. So I liken this to back in the Cold War when there were physicians for social responsibility who were doctors going over to the old Soviet Union to try to create a rapprochement and a dialogue, right? Mm-hmm. Just take this on a cosmic level. So where there should be humans reaching out to these civilizations for not some ulterior motive to get their goodies and get rich or turn them into a weapon system or blow them out of the sky, but because there's an opportunity coming up for humans to be part of a larger cosmic family or whatever you want to call it.
So what kind of communication are you having when you're summoning these beings?
We don't summon them. The King of England would summon a valet.
What do you call it?
I know Jake uses that term and it's appalling. You should never use that term.
What do you use?
We invite them.
Okay.
You summon your Uber driver, right? I mean, this is disrespectful. It's completely disrespectful.
Okay. Well.
So look. Words matter.
Sure.
Right.
Yes, they
words
do matter.
I agree. All right. So what are words? Words are expressions verbally of the thought, and the thought is expression of the consciousness behind it. So we do not call or summon them. We invite them with a sense of the equality that exists between all intelligent life. In other words, even if they're very different from us, they may have much higher IQs, more advanced technologically, but at the level of what Erwin Schrödinger talked about, the singularity of mind, of consciousness, and that's a universal constant. On that level, they're awake, we're awake. And so the light of awareness from my eyes, yours, and an ET's, it's the same. Because they've done studies. Consciousness is, in fact, a singularity. It's not divisible.
Sure.
We divide it by our egos, right?
Yeah.
But in reality, on a higher level of understanding, it's a singularity. So that is where we come together. This is why our motto is one universe, one people, that within the universe, at that level of consciousness and mind, we're all one people. And so that's why I don't like the term alien, which means foreign, right? I like the term, people. People say, what do you call it? I say, they're non-human people. They're extraterrestrial people. Now, the trick here, and this is where it gets very complicated for some people, is that a lot of people will do something like that, and they'll bump into something from another dimension, right? Like an angel or a demon or whatever. But that's not extraterrestrial. So this is where you get into this, Tucker Carlson. He got gaslit by a lot of these intel folks who told them that the aliens are demons. Well, the reason he was gaslit was because they were preying on his valid, Christian beliefs. I'm not questioning that at all. But this sort of cosmology that is known within many traditional circles, they wanted to conflate that with alien. And it's easy to do because that is another special operations capability. And that is to use very powerful electromagnetic systems to create phenomenon like you see at Skinwalker or Bradshaw Ranch. We know how they're doing it. I know who's doing it. I know what the electronics are. Now, there's an innate phenomenon that was there, but then both sites were taken over by covert human black operations.
So this aliens and demons narrative that it seems to be everywhere, where is that coming from, and what is the purpose behind it? What is the motive of it?
It is literally to demonize non-human existence so we can have war. See, everything tracks at the fear factor, right? Everything tracks back to how do you... How do you create an enemy, right?
Yeah, right.
All right. So if you're wanting to aggrandize the military-industrial super complex on a international level, the card that has to be eventually played, which is what Werner von Braun warned about, will be this alien threat card. And so you can do it in a lot of ways. If you're talking to someone who's religious, relate it to demons. If you're talking to someone who's conventional geopolitical, they're a national security threat or air safety threat.
Right.
If you want to relate it, whatever it is, so they have scripts and narratives to sort of affect. And what they do is they do an analysis of your own psychology and belief system, and they target it. So, and which it was interesting when I was at the Vatican.
There's
years
a flavor
ago.
of psyop for everyone.
Yes, and it's curated. It's tailored for that.
You're at the Vatican?
And I was at the Vatican some years ago when Pope John Paul was the Pope. I met with Monsignor Balducci. You may have heard of him. He was a senior theologian to the Pope and very interested in this issue of the ETs and UFOs. And ironically, he was also a demonologist at the Vatican. He
I
was.
just had an exorcist in here a couple days ago.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. And of course, not my cup of tea. I mean, whatever fires your rockets. But I was at his apartments overlooking, St. Peter's.
Yeah.
And he's turned to me. He says, neither demons nor angels require flying saucers. And it was such a quaint, succinct way of putting it. And I go, yeah, of course. So he was talking about all this disinformation and fear-mongering because that's how you control a populace. You have to create fear and a narrative, and then you get people to buy into it.
Two things. One, have you seen the shit Chris Bledsoe does with the orbs?
I've heard of it. I'm not that familiar with it. I
He
know
summons
he got,
orbs. Summons a bad word. He invites the orbs.
yes,
I'll
but
be
he's
nice.
also been intercepted by Jim Semivan, who's a CIA operative.
Exactly.
And others.
This is another thing. This is crazy. There's so many layers to this.
I know
right?
this.
I
Yep.
know that he has been. The crazy thing about this guy is I had him on the podcast over a year ago, and he is somehow able to invite these orbs, which I've personally witnessed with him on the beach a mile away from here. Me and Steve both. We filmed it. We have the video. It's real, but at the same time, there's CIA, NRO, NASA people coming and visiting him and befriending him and going to his kids' baseball game or football games.
Yep, I know.
And literally, it is almost exactly like the Paul Benowitz story.
I agree. And here's the problem. Anything that is of an extraterrestrial phenomenon can be simulated by these covert humans. And so all of it, the orbs, the craft, all manner of phenomenon. So people are grossly underestimating covert human capabilities, which is why we go out, and when we're doing CE5 contact with a high index of suspicion and skepticism, it's like, is that ET or is that stagecraft? Because I know in great detail what those capabilities are.
So when
And so someone who hasn't studied that, and I have the advantage of having debriefed nearly 1,000 of these whistleblowers who
Right.
have been in corporation. So, but I think this is why I'm trying to share this with the public as succinctly as I can, even though it's a complicated, what my Marine buddies call a clusterfuck of stuff. But it's something that really needs to be unpacked and understood so that people aren't tricked, right? So so any event that happens, I always go, well, you have to have it in your differential diagnosis or in your comparison. Was it something from another dimension that's not extraterrestrial, or a man-made, or a little more complicated subset, man-made extra-dimensional, where you could set up a stimulation by a man-made electronic system that, let's just say, tickles some other dimension and brings something into this dimension. Humans can do that. Human covert physicists that I've worked with have done that.
So how do you explain this guy being able to bring these light balls around him and bring them around? And like I was sat on the beach with him and his daughter for like 2 hours. I mean, Steve saw this thing that was not a plane it came out of the horizon.
Right.
Went that way, went back that way, and then just fizzled out into nowhere.
Right.
And he posts these all over his Instagram all the time. Like
I
that.
know.
Like I understand.
I don't know. See, I haven't been with him
Yeah.
to be able to discern.
Yeah.
It's like the old commercial. Is it real or is it Memorex? Back when they're Memorex
Right.
tapes. Is it endogenous ET? In other words, original ET, or is it originating from somebody piggybacking on him, right, or using that? I don't know, and so I don't know the gentleman.
I'm just saying, have you ever heard anything similar to that?
Oh, sure. We've had in fact, I was up on our land in Virginia, near Hot Springs, Virginia. I believe it was October or November, and we were up at about 3,000 feet. And I was there. We had a buddy, and we made a campfire, and I was doing a little meditation, and there were exactly what you described, about 15 or 20 of them that emerged and came over and below the crest in about a 40-minute period, or 40-minute period. There were more than a dozen. And I'm like, okay, I'm going, oh my God, and they just kept kind of, but so we have very similar phenomenon happen.
Yeah.
But I also know that you can stagecraft that if you're a special operations group with technologies. And this is not to try to discourage people from doing CE5 contact. I'm just saying there has to be a higher level of education and understanding. We're doing a cruise in the Caribbean, April 6th to the 12th, where it's full. There's 200 people. We'll be up on this big deck out in the middle of the ocean for a number of nights. But we're going to webinar it if people want to tune in, and we're going to do this whole CE5 contact in the middle of the. I've never done it. I've always wanted to do it in the middle of the ocean.
What island?
Oh, we're going all over. It's some big cruise liner that we're reserving.
It's like a legit cruise ship.
Yeah, it's like 3,100 people, but we have 200, and we're going to have the upper deck cordoned off. We'll be doing this late at night.
Wow.
It'll be way fun. I've never
wild.
done it. It's an experiment. We'll see what happens.
So I still have so many questions that are still on this topic. Number one, why do you think so many spooks are so interested in him and trying to push this idea, encourage him?
I honestly don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert in that case. I don't know the man or his family.
Well, just let's hypothetically let's say it's somebody else, right? Somebody else who has some crazy ability, right? Why would those specific people be so interested in a person like that?
Well, because it's the same reason why the psionic operation teams are interested in people who have the innate capability, right?
Okay.
And they want to see what they're doing, how they're doing it. They may want to intercept what they're doing and confuse the picture by staging some hoaxed events with real ones. It's not like either or. You have to think about how these guys would think. And what that motivation ultimately is, I have no idea. I just know there's some very bad actors swirling around the gentleman.
I'm going to write the name down on this iPad. I'm going to show it to you because I don't want to say this guy's name on the podcast because it'll get this podcast shadow banned. And I want to see if you know who he is. Steve, blur it out or don't show it.
I can't see it. No.
You don't know that name?
No.
Okay.
No. Anyway, I get shadow banned all the time.
Yeah, I know.
Although, it's funny. I was on a conference call with a bunch of tech people. Said, "Oh, that's a myth. Nobody gets shadow banned." I said,
"Oh, it definitely happens.
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
Definitely happens,
definitely
and it happens to the UFO topic, which is very odd."
Yeah. Oh no, it's not at all. I mean, if you think about, go back to that 1950 document, it's the biggest secret in the history of the United States, exceeding the secrecy of the development of the hydrogen bomb. So, the idea that the high end of the intelligence community trying to keep this secret wouldn't sanitize information and the other naivete about most people now is that those interests are not only penetrating the tech companies, in many cases they control those tech companies. Right? Think of the corporate nexus.
It's crazy.
Think about BlackRock. Think about,
all
right,
Google.
I don't want to go too far into
Google was literally funded and incubated by the CIA, the NSA, and DARPA.
Yes, I know that. And so is Microsoft.
Crazy.
Yep.
Completely batshit nuts when you go and you realize that Sergey had CIA, NSA people visiting him like monthly.
Sure.
And the technology came straight from DARPA. It sounds like such a crazy conspiracy.
No,
I read this.
No, it makes total sense, though.
Yeah, no, it does.
It makes total sense because if you can have keystroke by keystroke surveillance of everyone, right? That's what they wanted. That's what they wanted with Microsoft. That's what they wanted with the big tech companies. And ironically, the technology for doing that, from all accounts, much of it was reverse engineered from ET materials. But they didn't let out the energy systems that would eliminate poverty and human suffering and save the biosphere. They let the things out that would enable them to have the uber surveillance state we have today, mostly through the private sector. And, if people said the government were doing these things, but instead you click on an I agree on all your tech platforms, and you're giving the corporate titans who are interfacing with the intelligence community carte blanche to everything you're doing.
It's like a cutout.
It is a cutout.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's to anyone who really analyzes this, it's obvious. And that's another question about, our freedoms and privacy and much of the constitutional protections.
Right.
And I keep coming back to that because whether it's here or anywhere else in the world, if we don't have the rule of law, then we're in the jungle. And on this issue that then has sort of infiltrated many other sectors of our society, we don't have freedom and the rule of law. I always tell people, they brag about us having a free market economy. I go, oh, really? When the most important breakthroughs of the last 100 years in science and technology that would completely turn this planet into a paradise with free energy and all kinds of technologies have been ruthlessly suppressed up to and including killing people, right? No, we don't have a free market. We have a managed economy.
Right.
But so what the public needs to understand is we need to evolve out of that 100 years of nonsense and to this whole transformative new golden age. I mean, the new president's calling it that. Well, you're not going to do just a golden age based purely on drilling more oil out of the ground. You've got to create a golden age by letting our society advance both technologically, but also in our understanding of consciousness and spirituality, and that we're not alone in the universe, and do it in a way that doesn't cause everyone to go running for the door and jumping off bridges because we're being invaded by aliens.
I would love to see Trump do one of your CE5.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, maybe. Well,
I want to see him meditate and kind of communicate with these beings.
No, I think, look, I'm completely nonpartisan because I have to be. I've worked through many administrations and members of Congress. Luckily, on this issue in the Congress, it's very nonpartisan currently. The people who are interested.
Which is interesting.
Yeah, and it should be that way because it's not just the United States. I'm dealing with countries all over the world and leaders all over the world on this, frankly. I won't say which ones, but it needs to be a global understanding that transcends the usual idiotic fracture lines of murderous monkeys fighting over every little division we can find, right? I think we have to go beyond that in our thinking. And on something like this, it can't just be a partisan or even just an American issue. It really needs to be a global issue. And that's never happened. There have been attempts. The original Disclosure Project event was supposed to happen at the UN General Assembly in 2001. And the UN Secretary General was threatened, Kofi Annan. He was absolutely threatened. He says, if you do this, there'll be no more funding for the United Nations. So we had to do it at the National Press Club. And his right-hand guy called me up and says, Dr. Greer, we cannot do it here at the UN. So that was 24 years ago in May.
So we got off track again. We were talking about CE5, and I was asking you when you're inviting these extraterrestrials into the space in your meditation and you're interfacing with them, what is the communication?
Oh, it runs the gamut. Almost any weird thing you can imagine has happened. We've had fully materialized craft appear and disappear. We've had like that one ET that appeared between two people and then vanish. We've had unusual electromagnetic signals come through our electronic sensor systems. So like we'll have magnetometers and other equipment out there, and they will override the circuitry and start communicating through them. Very strange. And some of it's very repeatable sequences that we've recorded, almost like Arecibo without the billion-dollar telescopes. It's just
repeatable. How? Like you can
a sequence, a pattern that repeats that would not naturally occur or would not happen from a man-made source. And of course, many people have. It will be deep in meditation and get an override vision of a craft or a person, and say, "Oh, I'm sensing something in the northwest sky at 60 degrees." 5 minutes later, a craft appears there and moves and comes over. So there's a lot of precognitive capabilities that develop when you develop the consciousness.
Any like direct telepathic communication?
Yes, all the time. Yeah.
And what is the context of it?
It runs the gamut, but it's for many people who, I know this is my experience, is that they're making it quite clear they're here for very good reason. But a lot of it is also laden with some warning of where we are, and that our civilization is at a point where it needs to either, change directions or it's going to face some really terrible outcomes. And it's not a threat. It's just like, this is where you are. And it's sort of like the Hopi prophecy where, one line terminates and the other one goes on forever. If you know the Hopi prophecy, Native American.
Right.
It's sort of like that. That is a theme that comes up a lot. And I think we are at that point where we're going to have to transition If we continue to think in the same paradigm of division and war and conflict, it's not like we're using machine guns and tanks. We have not only thermonuclear, but these other technologies that are covert. It's not sustainable to live like this. And nor is it sustainable for the Earth's biosphere to have 8 billion people living like we did in the 1800s, burning stuff, right? So there's very frequently a sort of Earth-based environmental message that comes through about the dangers not only geopolitically of endless war with these technologies, but also what we're doing to the oceans and the atmosphere and genetic mutations and cancer rates.
Yeah.
That all of this is a consequence of having suppressed for 100 years breakthroughs in technology that would have moved us onto another path.
Right.
So that's what we call the documentary The Lost Century.
Yeah.
Because there's a lost century of social and technological evolution, but also with that, sort of spiritual evolution. Because what happens when a world no longer is in want and fighting over scarce resources? I think the work week will drop to 10 or 15 hours a week. People will have extraordinary amount of time for creative pursuits and the pursuit of higher states of consciousness and meditative and what have you. Hopefully not everyone's spending all their time on YouTube looking at kitty cats playing the piano, but that might happen too. But
I think there's two main drivers. There's fear of death, and I think there's sex. I think those are the two main drivers of our civilization, the way we're going right now. There's a great quote from this show Westworld, where he's saying the human intellect is like peacock feathers. The human psyche is like peacock feathers. It's an elaborate mating call. Everything from the Mona Lisa to the Eiffel Tower to the Brooklyn Bridge, the Statue of David. All it is an elaborate mating call. Some of the best creations and pieces of artwork in human history, and that's sort of what drives our innovation and our
part of it,
our drive to make more money, to get better things, to drive a nicer car, to have a bigger house. And it seems like if we didn't have that, if we were genderless and if we didn't fuck each other to reproduce, then maybe we would be on a different trajectory.
Well, I don't think it's either or either. I mean, I think you can have a body and a planet that's physical and also pursue higher states of consciousness and spirituality. I don't think the asceticism is the way. I don't think you deny the one, but you add to that a higher conscious understanding and spirituality. And I think that is the balance. There's sort of like these inherent tensions and contradictions that exist in the modern era and has for many, many times. But one of the features you mentioned earlier of the P3 or psionic operators, when you mentioned that some of these areas that we would call primitive, but they're living more in touch with nature, have this innate ability, it harkens back to the Aboriginals in Australia that had what was called dream time. And they would literally have lucid dreams at night, communicate with each other, and have meetups with no telephones or smoke signals or anything. And so in many civilizations that we would dismiss as primitive, that was just part of the natural order. Western civilization coming into science and through the scientific revolution, and also rejecting the superstitions and excesses of the Middle Ages and whatnot, sort of threw the baby out with the bathwater. So I see a time where we'll go forward as a high-tech civilization, but at the same time an increasingly conscious and enlightened civilization, both. And I think that's the sort of balance where you become a very advanced civilization because primacy is with your conscious evolution. The world is as you are, as it says in the Vedas. The world we see is a reflection of what our level of consciousness and thoughts are. And so I think that can evolve. There's no reason why we have to be stuck in the current state of things. Now, change is difficult. Most people don't like change or adventures. I love adventures and change, but it's something that if we stay, it's like the old Chinese saying, unless we change directions, we're likely to end up where we're going. And I say, look, where are we going? Going to hell in a handbasket right now. Not just geopolitically, but in terms of tensions and wars, but also with the earth and the environment and poverty. Do you know the Economist last couple of years ago had an article, 3 billion people on Earth don't even have energy to cook their food. So they're cutting out the brush and making deserts appear and cutting down the rainforest. 3 billion of the 8 billion. Mm-hmm. So there's no way to have a peaceful world or a just world with the zero-sum game of the current energy system. This becomes very clear. But as Patrick David told me the other day, if you bring these out, there are so many powerful interests. You're talking about hundreds of trillions of dollars in aggregate impact. So, and that was the mistake of 100 years ago. If these technologies had been brought out when there were only 2.5 billion people on the earth, and very few of those people had electricity and cars, it would have been a natural evolution. Now, we're either headed towards a very bad situation globally, geopolitically and environmentally, geophysically, or we have to bring these out, which will be admittedly very disruptive. You know, talk about a disruptive technology. So how do we do that? Well, it's going to have to be very smart and very managed. And so these are the complexities that, to be honest with you, world leaders and the president and the National Security Council need to be discussing urgently. And what I'm concerned about is that it seems that in the next year or two, this is all going to get disclosed. And when I meet with senior government officials, which I do quite often, they don't know anything about the subject, or what they do know has been some blended false information that has gaslit them in the wrong path. Yeah. And this frightens me. I mean, because knowledge is power, and if you don't have it, you're going to be manipulated into all the wrong decisions. And I think we need to have our leaders here and abroad brought up to speed on this in a serious way, which is, I mean, what I should be doing and am trying to do. What I really ought to do is retire. But I'm tired and I'm getting old. But,
yeah, go relax on those 600 acres.
Oh, we do. I take time for that. And I work out a lot. And you know, I was almost killed in an accident about 15 months ago. And
oh, shit.
Oh, yeah.
What happened?
I don't talk about it. It was a mess. Someone saw through the seat on my bicycle, mountain bike, and it snapped off. And my left leg came off. My left foot came off. The bones were in the air. This shoulder was ripped off. My abdomen split open. I had 4 surgeries.
What?
Oh, yeah. I even believe the things I've had happen to me.
Holy shit.
It was bad. It was the worst I've had. And, you know, in the 90s, I had 3 people on my team killed, 2 by electronically induced cancers, and the former CI director, Bill Colby, who was going to help us bring these energy technologies out. They just wet worked him in the river south of D.C., made it look like an accident. So, you know, this is serious stuff.
They literally tried to kill you on your bike.
Oh, I think it was more of a speed bump, slow me down. It was 3 weeks after I got back from the black site in the chopper where I filmed the underground opening.
Yeah.
Where some of the Lockheed objects come up from an underground facility and are tested. And I handed that over to the Senate Intelligence
You got to
Committee.
be so paranoid, man.
No, I'm not. Not at all. No.
If all these people that you've worked with have been whacked.
No, your paranoid implies that you'd be afraid of all this. But I think the saving grace, even though I was raised an agnostic atheist, of having had that near-death experience when I was 17.
Not afraid of death?
I'm not afraid of that because
Really?
Now I don't like being tortured. I don't want to be injured. I don't want to have a life of misery, which is what they've made my life a miserable thing. But, you know, no. I mean, being without this, you know, physical body and being in the worlds of the conscious light that I experienced, no, that's a beautiful thing. I don't have a death wish, but I'm also not afraid. I mean, it's sort of like the old Shambhala warriors of old, you know, where they were spirit warriors.
Why haven't they? I mean, I would imagine like all this stuff that you're doing, and you've been doing this for so freaking long.
Yeah.
I can't believe they haven't tried to take you out yet.
Well,
I mean, other than the bicycle incident.
Oh, I've had other things. I had metastatic malignant melanoma at the same month that a member of Congress and my right-hand assistant got cancers. I almost died. That was in 96, 7, something like that. But yeah, I think Colby was killed 95, 96. Bill Colby, the CIA director. But
How was he killed?
well, he allegedly was out canoeing on a
Yeah, I've heard this
rainstorm,
story.
but his son thought he committed suicide. But he was working with a colonel and with a member of my team to hand over one of these 0-point quantum generators with about $50 million in seed money so we could get it out, open source it, and get it out to the public. And the week he was going to meet with a member of my board, they found him floating down the Potomac. But it's an unsolved murder, but we know what happened. His best friend came to my friend's funeral, Sherry's funeral, and said, we both have had terrible losses, but can't look back. So,
Going back to the angels and demons stuff, have you heard of the Virginia, Brazil incident?
yes, I have.
That thing smelled like sulfur. And in the Bible, it talks about demons smelling like sulfur.
But here's the other problem. I'm not an expert on that case. The question is, was it ET? Was it human induced? Or was it from another dimension? And
Have you ever seen anything like that? You know all about the alien species, right? You know all about the catalog. The guy said there's 69 different ones.
oh yeah, and our team has had experiences with a huge variety.
And you've never seen anything like that one with the red eyes, the Virginia one.
No. And one of the questions I always have is, given what I know about what human electromagnetic field experimentation has done, there's a physicist I'm working with. He's down near the Redstone Arsenal, Huntsville Space Flight Center, Marshall Space Flight Center. He has his own skiff I've been in, and his lower level of his house is also a skiff, a secure compartment information facility. And I mean, these guys have created like toroidal electromagnetic systems where they will tap into the ninth ring of hell or whatever, and some creature will be 3D running around the lab.
What?
And it sounds absolutely batshit crazy, and it is, but it's true. So whatever you can imagine, Ben Rich, the week he died, was talking to a friend of mine, Jim Goodall, who's a well-known aerospace historian, and said, and Jim was pushing on this issue about what Lockheed Skunk Works had. He said, well, anything you can imagine that you've seen on Star Trek, we've already done at the Lockheed Skunk Works, and it's not at Area 51. It's out in the desert underground. And that is true. And I've been over that facility. I mean, not long ago, right before I was critically injured. But so there are people who have surfaced describing some of those. Well, what does that mean? It means that the capabilities of this covert human group could stage anything. And this is why people say, well, you're the biggest skeptic I ever heard. You don't believe that. I said, well, I'm not saying there aren't genuine extraterrestrial, non-human intelligence, but there's all this other stuff. And all this other stuff gets really complicated. And it makes sense once you unpack 70 or 80 years of super advanced engineering and science and technology from studying this area of physics. And one of the big mistakes everyone makes is they don't give enough credit to the genius of the people who worked on those programs. Like this gentleman I just referred to, he's redacted in what we're making available to the public, but he's not redacted for some other folks. Highest IQ, one of the highest IQs of anyone I've ever met on Earth. And what I have found is that people of very high capabilities, they're tapped either right out of college or in high school even, and brought in because they have such amazing aptitude. And there's a process for screening for that. And it's a real process. And they're looking for people with extraordinary talents and IQs and abilities. So I always tell people the smartest people I've ever met are not at Harvard, MIT, or Caltech, or whatever. They're in covert operations and corporate and some government. And those guys are amazingly brilliant. And they're highly incentivized to study this and figure out different applications. And I think people grossly underestimate that. And because they underestimate it, they're constantly being deceived and tricked by human phenomenon, human events, and weird stuff, and thinking it's something it isn't. And that's what happened with the Skinwalker Ranch. There was an innate phenomenon there. I don't think it was extraterrestrial. I think it was extra-dimensional. And a bunch of guys operating with Robert Bigelow and the intelligence community set up some electronics that ran the rancher off. So they forcibly bought it virtually. And then they set up all these weird electromagnetic phenomenon there. And I know how they did it. And I have someone who was embedded in that team who's described it. Same thing with the Bradshaw Ranch near Sedona. You know, recently there was someone who works with Elizondo on a podcast talking about, yeah, that's an alien, but I've had my people scouted out. There are guys all dressed in black down below a hill, and it's a complete black site. I don't know if it's CIA or corporate, but you know, so this happens all the time. If you have an area that has an innate, some would say a portal, but an innate phenomenon going on, those will get taken over and turn into a black site that's human. And then the public gets gaslit and deceived about all the phenomenon there. So it's more trickery.
You're saying that they will deliberately use their tricks to make it seem like there's some crazy fuckery going on there, and it's some sort of interdimensional portals with witches and all this stuff. And then that will force the ranchers to to flee, and they can buy it.
Terrifying.
And they can keep doing that stuff.
They ran off the people on the Bradshaw Ranch. Same thing with Skinwalker. Now there's a new owner. I don't know him, but I knew the people who got it after the rancher was terrified and run off. And they can do things through normal electric wires, power lines that they can put a signal down, and all of a sudden some creepy thing happens, and apparition appear and disappear. This is the high end of what we call the stagecraft or tradecraft.
Stagecraft.
Yeah, staging things. And one of the problems with ufology and with this whole subject is that you really can't begin to even make a judgment call on what you're looking at unless you unpack what the human capabilities are. And then you can begin to put it into the categories and get some discernment. But it's a very difficult thing to do. And, in 1991, I was at a conference, and a CIA guy, old guy, he looked like the cigarette man in the, what's that show, X-Files, because some of those episodes they took from my early work. And we were walking along, and he said, let's walk along the beach. And he said, look, the truth is so much stranger than any fiction. We can sell the fiction and people will believe it. But if you tell people the truth, they won't believe it. And it's less believable than the fiction. And it is. Yeah. So that's been a real conundrum.
Fiction has to make sense. Truth doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. And the truth on this is such a tangled web. And it's been done deliberately because it has the ability to then confuse the picture, but also create this specter of fear where the long-term goals can be fulfilled. My concern is that disclosure, I wrote a paper in 1999 called, it's on our website, When Disclosure Serves Secrecy, meaning the secret government operations. And if this issue gets disclosed the way it currently is on track to be, it'll be a war of the worlds, panic in the aisle. It'll be 1,000 times worse than COVID.
The way it's on track to be disclosed.
Yes, where you have the people who or keep going up to Congress and the White House and other places and conflating man-made frightening things like abductions and villages being blown up with extraterrestrial threat or NHI threat. And they're deliberately commingling. No one is making this discernment between a bunch of psyops and covert technologies masquerading as ET. No one is doing that. In fact, the dominant paradigm is to call all of it one thing. And in that calling it one thing, it makes people conclude there is a threat and we need to fight it. So let's go to DEFCON 1. Let's go to Independence Day, the movie. Let's go to War of the Worlds. So I think this manipulation is 99% of what people hear. And I don't really, honestly, right now, if you were to put me under sodium truth serum, I don't.
We got some.
Do you? Oh, good. Go for it.
Steve, lock the doors.
All right.
I really don't see that right now, as things stand as of this moment, that there is a critical mass of people who are able to come forward and not be captured, let's call it, by that narrative. Trapped by that narrative. Now, it even gets more spooky when you start dealing with senior people in government who have not been read into this, who are brand new to this. And we'll go in with information, and then right after us will be a disinformation team that goes in.
Yeah.
Like clockwork. So, and I'm a private civilian, and those people go in with credentials from the Pentagon, right? Or some intelligence agency. So, it's daunting, but I don't think we should give up on getting the truth out and exposing the lies and the cover up, but also the trickery. But I don't see right now there's a lot of bandwidth, let's just say.
So you were alluding to earlier when you were mentioning Elizondo. He is behind this whole threat narrative.
It's mixed. I mean, he's actually evolving a little bit off of that because he needs to, and that's been exposed. But I think one of the reason he initially emerged was to be sure that 2 or 3 major false narratives came out. One was, we don't have anything that's man-made that could be this, when 80% of what people are saying are man-made, covert. Okay, that was one message. The other was that it's a threat to the national security, which it is, but not from out there in space. It's the threat is within. I mean, got it. Right? But he was
the rogue organization.
The rogue secret government organization is the threat. It's treasonous, it's traitorous, it's murderous, it's unconstitutional, it's criminal. So that narrative it is to say what I just described, when disclosure serves secrecy. Yes, this is real. It's all coming out. The UFOs are real, which everybody's known forever. But they're a threat. And we don't have anything that can fly like that. Now, luckily, in the last 2 or 3 years...
Does Elizondo say that we don't have anything like this?
Yes, he did initially. Not anymore.
Not anymore.
And neither is Grush, and neither is Fravor and others. But that was something that I was forcefully in the public saying that is a falsehood. And I would go to senators and congressmen and say, no, that is wrong. And that is a lie, and a damnable lie. Because if you believe that, then a priori, you have to think that all the horrible things that have happened have also been at the hands of the ETs, when they've been at the hands of a CIA special operations team, right? Or SOs, special operators.
Right.
So I think that was the thing that concerned me the most. Now, I'm hoping, I don't have any grievance against any individual, honestly. I mean, mostly I don't know them. I'm more concerned about the human future and human consciousness being polluted with a false narrative that leads us into this dystopian future of endless war and expanded war into space and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. Because that's how you get to Armageddon. That's how you get to a catastrophic conclusion. So that's my big concern. And I think this is why I don't care who you are. I'm going to speak the truth about it. There's an old saying, I speak the truth whether it gives you counsel or offense. So that's the ER doc in me. If you got a brain tumor, I'm not going to tell you have a migraine. Right? So that's just me. But, and it makes me very controversial and very unlikable, which I don't care. I'm not running for mayor of Crazy Town Ufology either, by the way. So I couldn't care about that.
Sure.
I care about what the truth is, but also how the truth is articulated that doesn't result in some just furtherance of the agenda of the secret group. Because what would be, this is their dream, is to let this come out and pivot the whole world onto a path of needing Big Brother to run endless war and offensive and defensive operations against NHI, right? That's been the plan. And I, right now, I will say that the weight of the thrust of how this is being brought forward, if you look at media reports, social media, that is the thrust of what's happening. We're trying to bend the curve towards something truthful, but also a positive outcome for humanity and for the United States, because the United States is the crown jewel in these covert secret programs. And many of our big corporations are tied into these in a compartmented special projects divisions, and a lot of them. So I think we have to figure out how to do this, but this needs to come out where it's. And I basically in here you're going to laugh. It's a draft speech for the president or other world leaders to give that I've written.
Why would I laugh about that?
Because people go, really? It's kind of. I said, but it has to be this coming out. You cannot speak about this with, well, let's just blow them out of the sky, right? That kind of thing. So, this is dangerous. The kind of talk that attends the disclosure discussions it leads to a catastrophic outcome for the Earth and humanity. Mm-hmm. And there's one other risk that's a little bit more ominous. And that is, there are 3 different people I'm working with that don't know each other that have been in comm centers, communication centers, where somehow they have intercepted communications from NHI.
From extraterrestrials.
Yeah. That they're getting quite fed up with the fact that we are taking their technologies and using it against them, and that has reached a point where we are a threat, not just to ourselves, but to out there. So people are grossly underestimating how those covert programs are threatening Earth, because not that these civilizations are hostile, but they certainly are not going to let a rogue group of psychopaths threaten other worlds. So if we don't get this under control, it'll have to be brought under control. But the worst case scenario, everyone says, why don't the aliens just fix this? I said that would be the worst case scenario, because if that happens, it'll be portrayed as an alien invasion.
Wouldn't the aliens
and
just...
they're too smart for that.
Yeah, the aliens are smart. They're way smarter than us. They have to be.
IQ's 400 north of 400.
So why wouldn't they just quietly go after those people and just shut them down?
There would be no way to do that without it also being portrayed by their lackeys in government and the media as an alien invasion. So
yeah, I'm saying quietly do it, so no one else knows.
There's no way to quietly do this, my friend. I mean, if you start looking at the map in here and the list of corporations, sites, facilities, the trillions of dollars involved with this, that ain't going to happen where it wouldn't be noticed. Now, humans can get and here's what I think. Here's one of the messages, is that we need to fix our own mess here. And there's no reason we can't. I think it's sort of a weird cosmic codependency to think that someone from out there is going to land here and fix our problems. I mean, how well did that work in Afghanistan, right? Oh, we're going to go in and nation build, and they're right back to warlords and nonsense. It's got to come from the people, right? Now, I don't necessarily say the leaders, the people. The people will lead, the leaders will have to follow. But we become very passive people. And I think we have to not be so passive. I think the people need to speak up, stand up, articulate, and hopefully exhort our leaders to do the right thing. I grew up I was born in 1955, so I remember I grew up in the South, very poor. And, my grandmother's Cherokee, my father was half native, and they were called half-breeds. And I have a twin sister who looks very native. But at that time there was Jim Crow in the South. There was still segregated water fountains, all that. Mm-hmm. And I remember how weird that was. I mean, I was 4, 5, 6, and I'd go to a water fountain where there was no line, and a little old lady would grab me and say, "Don't drink out of that one. That's for," I think they said, colored people or something like that.
Yeah.
And I went, because my parents were not all racist. I went, well, is the water different? It was like this magical system, this racist system. And I saw that evolve, and I had an African American girlfriend in high school. I almost got run over by a bunch of racists who did not like that. And, but that all changed, not because the president and Congress changed it. It happened because of Bayard Rustin and Martin Luther King Jr. And there was a movement that made that happen, right? So I think people forget that big changes in society rarely come from the top down. It comes from the people up.
Sure.
And this is that lesson is lost on most people today because most people just sit around looking at their phones and don't do anything. But I remember that era, and I remember how different. I mean, things aren't perfect now with race relations, but boy, it's a big difference from the 50s and 60s when I was a kid. And imagine having an African American girlfriend in North Carolina in 72 or 3, So I think that, progress can happen, but it's a lot of hard work and a lot of sacrifice, and people have to stand up and be heard. And that's part of what the whole disclosure movement has been about. When I started, people don't realize that we started the whole disclosure movement in the 90s. It's now even the word disclosure is used by the New York Times, but we started that in the mid to late 90s.
Yeah,
right. But
now, obviously, I think you've said it before, but you believe that organizations, whether I don't know if you were talking about the government or if you're talking about these rogue groups, have possession or captive alien bodies.
Yeah, they have living ones as well.
They have living ones, and who is this that is this the government or is this rogue organization?
That's the rogue government. It's the secret government, and those are in places that need to be, let's call, liberated. And
do you know where they are?
I'm not precisely. I have a very good idea. So one of the things we have mapped are the underground entry points, and then and the connectivity. Say you have the Edwards complex. And then you have east of there what's called the Ant Hill. And those are entry points into underground subterranean facilities or bases. But they connect underground to Nellis and out to the northern net. So it's an underground, that's what they call it, an ant hill. If you go to an ant farm, you go in and there are all these connections, right? So we have a very good idea of where those are. And some of the whistleblowers we're working with know even more. And that needs to be provided to people in the U.S. government so that they can get control of those. And there are some very brave men I'm working with who have been special forces guys who are prepared to go in and get those facilities under control and also to liberate those people.
That's crazy, too. If these things are so smart and so advanced, how are they going to let one of their own be captive by us?
Well, that's a lot of people say that, but just because you're advanced doesn't mean terrible things don't happen. I mean, technically you could throw a bunch of spears by cavemen into the rotors of a Sikorsky helicopter and jam it up and have it crash. So, bad things happen. Of course, being a trauma guy, you just see the weirdest things happen. So just because they're very advanced, people conflate that with being infallible.
Right.
Well, I think God's infallible, but certainly no individual person or civilization's infallible. So this concept that just because they're extremely high tech and bright mean they're infallible, no. Now, is it that often that it happens? No, it doesn't. The one site I was over, I was told there are 1 or 2 ET craft per year downed. And I went over 2 black sites. And so, 2 to 4 a year over a big area of that part of the desert. So it's not like they're dropping out of the sky like flies, is what I'm saying. It's still terrible. But then remember, we have sites like that all over the world, outback of Australia, South America, all around. And it's still tragic, and it shouldn't be happening. And when there are ones that are living, they just don't flat out kill them. They would prefer to interrogate them and keep them. And so my understanding is that there are a number of ETs that are in captivity and are still living. One guy euphemistically called them refugees. I think not. They're prisoners. But, so I think that is another, humanitarian effort that should happen at some point where they're freed.
And how many different versions or species of these things do you think we have? And have you ever seen any of them in person?
I've not seen living ones in captivity in those bases. No, I've seen ETs, but they're not, to my knowledge. I've never heard anyone describe the variety of them. I know that in the crash retrievals, now we have 122 documented crash retrieval events that are in. Part of them are in here, but in our archive, dpiarchive.com, all of them are in there, and they range from ones that are a foot and a half tall to some that are 8-10 feet tall, and all kinds of different, we would just say, genetic expressions, but they seem to all have a head, 2 arms, and 2 legs. But
Interesting.
But beyond that, there's just an infinite variety.
What about the mantis ones?
Well, that one that was the healer, when you see him is sort of a triangular head, and they're known as really extraordinary healers. I mean, they have some amazing healing capabilities.
That one right there?
This guy.
That's a mantis?
Yeah. What some people would call it sort of a triangular head. You can see in a sort of, you can outline it. If I had my cursor, I could do it. But remember, this is in complete darkness in the wilderness up on a mountain in Arizona. This was actually in Oracle, ironic, O-R-A-C, like
Oh, really?
Oracle, Arizona.
Interesting.
Yeah, a couple years ago. And so that's, and we love doing that. That's my real passion, is going out and the experimentation and using consciousness and remote viewing to make contact and see what happens. And a lot of it varies on the group, because if there's someone not on the page or someone there who's filled with superstition and fear, they won't show up because they don't want to be around dumb people who haven't figured that out.
Now, what?
Sorry, but if you haven't figured that out, they're going, "Why are you out there with us? Go home, and go look at Stranger Things or something."
How far have you gotten in your investigation into those beings that you talked about and studied in your Sirius documentary? The small beings, and I think you talked about Gary Nolan worked with you on that.
Yeah, Gary Nolan received a lot of money right after we gave him that genetic sample, and he altered the results of it. So we don't know what that creature is.
He received a lot of money?
Yeah. I think it was $3.4 million from the Pentagon, and then he is now contracting with the intelligence community to show UAP injuries, which is just a psyop.
It's a psyop.
Yes, of course. I mean, the UAP injuries are all man-made, but of course, you get someone like him.
It's the man-made reverse engineered.
Of course, and of course, but you put this the stink on the ETs when it's something we've done. Right. So unfortunately, I think that went sideways very badly. So to this day, we don't know what that thing was. Now, he published a report saying it was a deformed fetus, even though the top geneticist or doctor who deals with bone malformations said no way, because it was global. It had growth plates, consistent, equivalent of a 6-year-old human, but it was only about 6 inches tall. And so we don't know what it was. It could have been something that is a completely unknown species on Earth. It could have been something that's a result of both Earth and non-human interactions that are ancient in that part of the Atacama Desert in Chile.
Yeah.
There are accounts of these UFOs being seen, and these small creatures. The adult ones are like a foot and a half tall. But to this day, we actually don't know what it is. I mean, I never said it was ET. I said we don't know what it is, but it's most certainly not human. So what was published by Gary Nolan and those guys, and I've had the top geneticists in the world tear apart their data, says it's totally hoaxed. It's totally academic fraud.
Really?
So, yes.